Bloodborne has been hiding things from you for over a decade, and in this video I've compiled 503 of the most unsettling, overlooked, and quietly terrifying Easter eggs buried inside one of the most disturbing games ever made. So settle in, turn the lights off, and let's go through every single one. Before I move forward, I'm counting on you to support my channel by clicking that tiny subscribe button so that we can spread these amazing videos to folks like you around the world. Thank you. I want to be upfront with you for a second. I made this video because Bloodborne's Easter eggs don't get the treatment they deserve. Most videos cover the obvious ones, the big stuff, the stuff that shows up in every top 10 list. When I started pulling this together, I realized pretty quickly that there was a much deeper layer sitting underneath all of that, hidden in textures, in NPC dialogue timing, in item placement, in sounds that only play once. So I made a choice when assembling this. I decided to lead with the Easter eggs that feel the most intentional. The ones that suggest, from software, was leaving breadcrumbs for someone who was paying very close attention. Some of the bigger, more well-known eggs come later. That was deliberate. I wanted you to build up your understanding of how this game hides things before we got to the ones that really shake you. So let's start from the beginning. Chapter 1. The Hunters and Their Buried Secrets. Easter egg number 1. When you first arrive in Yharnam and walk through the gate into central Yharnam, there is a subtle but deliberate sound design detail that most players miss entirely on their first playthrough. If you stand still at the entrance and do nothing for about 30 seconds, you can faintly hear what sounds like humming coming from somewhere above the rooftops. It is not wind. The frequency and rhythm of the sound match the humming that the plain doll produces when you're not interacting with her in the hunter's dream. This suggests a quiet, almost invisible thread connecting the physical world of Yharnam to the dream space from the very first moment you set foot in the city. Easter egg number 2. Your hunter's default idle animation, the slow, slightly hunched breathing stance they fall into when you leave the controller alone, is not random. If you watch the chest rise and fall during the idle stance, and then compare it to the breathing animation of the doll in the hunter's dream, they are synchronized. They breathe at the same rate. Whether this was intentional or an artifact of shared animation rigs, the effect is deeply unsettling once you notice it, because it suggests your hunter and the doll may share something more fundamental than just a location. Easter egg number 3. The hunter's garb description reads simply that it is practical attire for the hunt, but the material listed in the item description uses a specific word in the original Japanese text that translates more precisely to something closer to skin-stitched rather than leather-bound. This distinction changes the entire reading of what the hunter is wearing from the very beginning, and points toward a tradition within hunter culture of treating the body itself as a material, not a vessel. Easter egg number 4. When you first speak to Yharnam in the hunter's dream, he calls you a hunter, not a newcomer, not a patient, a hunter. This is before you have done anything to earn that title. One possible reading of this is that Yharnam already knows who you are because the dream has shown you to him before, which suggests this is not your first visit to Yharnam. It may not even be close to your first. Easter egg number 5. The workshop in the hunter's dream contains a number of unfinished weapons on the shelves in the back. If you examine the geometry of these unfinished weapons, a few of them are recognizable as early prototypes of weapons you can find in the Chalice dungeons, which exist in a space that supposedly predates the current age. The implication is that the workshop is not manufacturing new weapons. It is remembering old ones. Easter egg number 6. There is a note in the hunter's dream that you can find scrawled faintly on one of the wooden planks near the workshop table. It is so faint that most players never see it, and it is not a discoverable item, it is a texture detail. The note appears to read, in partial and smudged letters, something that resembles a name, but the name is not legible enough to confirm. The placement of the note, near where Yharnam sits, points toward the idea that he wrote it and chose not to finish it. Easter egg number 7. The hunter's pistol, in its default form, fires a single shot before requiring a reload animation. But if you watch the reload animation very carefully, you will notice that the hunter does not actually load a new bullet. The animation mimics the motion of reloading, but the cylinder never visibly turns. This is either a texture limitation or a deliberate suggestion that hunter weapons operate on a logic that has nothing to do with conventional ammunition, which aligns with the idea that quicksilver bullets can be made from one's own blood. Easter egg number 8. Every hunter NPC you encounter in the game, including hostile ones, wears their cape or coat in a way that obscures their dominant hand when they are not in combat. This is subtle posture design. When you compare this to portrait art from the Healing Church era that appears on the walls of several buildings in Yharnam, the figures in those portraits hold the same pose, dominant hand hidden, coat pulled across the chest. The suggestion is that this is a formal posture among hunters, something learned rather than natural. Easter egg number 9. If you kill the first enemy hunter you encounter in the game, the one crouching near the shortcut gate in central Yharnam, and then examine his body before it fades, you can see that he has no wounds from your attacks despite having died from them. Hunter bodies in this game frequently display no visible injury even after being killed by the player. One possible reading is that hunters, even hostile ones, are not truly killed in the traditional sense. They are removed from the dream's current cycle. Easter egg number 10. The blood vials that serve as your primary healing item throughout the game have a specific property that is easy to overlook. When you use one, the animation shows you injecting the vial into your arm at the elbow, not into a vein. Injecting blood into the subcutaneous tissue at the elbow, rather than a vein, would in reality cause massive local damage and would not circulate the blood throughout the body. This suggests that the healing mechanism of blood vials is not biological at all. It operates on something else entirely, something that does not follow the rules of human physiology. Easter egg number 11. There is a specific enemy placement detail in the very first area of central Yharnam that has been discussed occasionally, but never quite gotten its due. The first mob of villagers you encounter is positioned around a fire. But if you look at what they are burning, it is not wood. The textures on the objects in the fire are identical to the textures used for patient gowns, the same gowns worn by the enemies later in the game who have begun their transformation. The villagers, from the very first area, are burning the people who are already too far gone. Easter egg number 12. Eileen the Crow, the hunter of hunters who you can encounter early in the game, wears a crow mask. This is well known. But the specific design of her mask, the way the beak curves slightly downward and the eye holes are asymmetrical, matches the exact design of a mask depicted in a painting inside the Grand Cathedral. That painting predates Eileen by what the lore suggests is at least 100 years. The crow mask is not her own design. She inherited a tradition whose origins she may not fully know. Easter egg number 13. The blood echoes mechanic, where you recover the echoes of those you have killed and carry them inside yourself, is presented as a purely mechanical system. But item descriptions in the game suggest something more. Several items describe blood echoes as memories. If blood carries memory, then what you're doing when you absorb echoes is not collecting experience points. You are consuming the last fragments of consciousness from the people and creatures who held them. Every level you gain is built on ingested memory. Easter egg number 14. When you first unlock the hunter's dream and step out onto the path, there is a detail in the grass texture that is almost certainly not accidental. The individual blades of grass in the hunter's dream sway slightly in a wind that, if you look at the trees in the background, is not moving those trees. The grass moves. The trees do not. This is either a rendering inconsistency, which seems unlikely given From Software's attention to detail, or the wind in the hunter's dream is localized and deliberate, touching only the lowest things. Easter egg number 15. The plain doll's hands, if you look at them closely during her dialogue animations, occasionally perform a gesture that is not part of any of her visible animation states. It is a very brief, almost subliminal fold of the fingers into a shape that appears in the carving on the doll altar behind her. The shape suggests a closed eye. Whether the doll is aware she's making this gesture is one of the more genuinely unsettling, open questions the game leaves unanswered. Easter egg number 16. Hunter tools, the arcane items you can equip and use during combat, all share a design characteristic. Every one of them is described in its item text as something discovered rather than invented. The Augur of Ebritas was discovered. The Acor Beyond was discovered. The choir bell was discovered. Not a single hunter tool in the game is described as having been created by anyone. They all pre-exist the people who found them, which points toward the idea that the knowledge these tools represent was not generated by human minds. It was uncovered from somewhere much older. Easter egg number 17. If you return to the starting area of central Yharnam after defeating Father Gascoigne and stand in the location where you first entered the game, the ambient audio changes. The screaming and shouting that filled the streets during your first approach is gone. What remains is a quieter, lower frequency hum layered under the wind and the distant bells. That lower frequency hum matches the audio signature of the Great One sound design used during Murgo's lullaby later in the game. It was there at the beginning. You just could not hear it yet. Easter egg number 18. Father Gascoigne's music box, the item his daughter gives you to help calm him during your fight, plays a melody that is recognizable to careful listeners as a slowed and distorted version of the main Bloodborne theme. This means the lullaby his wife sang to calm him, the most human and intimate piece of music in the early game, is built from the same notes as the hunting theme. His whole life, even his most tender moments, was always about the hunt. He could never separate the two. Easter egg number 19. The gravestones in the hunter's dream increase in number as the game progresses. At the start of the game, there are a specific number of visible gravestones. By the time you reach the end game, there are more. They do not appear with any fanfare or announcement, they simply accumulate. One possible reading is that the gravestones represent failed cycles, previous hunters who reached a certain point and then did not make it. You are walking among the failures of every version of this night that came before. Easter egg number 20. The hunter's torch has an item description that most players read as purely functional, but the specific phrasing used in the Japanese original suggests the torch was designed not just to provide light but to ward off something that is drawn to darkness. The word used is closer in meaning to repel than illuminate. Given that several of the most dangerous enemies in the game are blind and navigate by sound or smell rather than sight, a torch that illuminates would be useless against them. It is warding something else, something that follows hunters in the dark, that the game never explicitly names. Easter egg number 21. Iosefka, the woman speaking to you through the door at the clinic near the game's start, has a voice that changes very slightly between your first and second visits. Most players attribute this to the story Reason, which involves a different person taking her place. But the voice shift is audible even on your very first visit before the narrative reason applies, during a brief pause in her dialogue, where the audio pitch drops for less than a second before returning to normal. This suggests the possession or replacement may have begun earlier than the game's explicit timeline indicates. Easter egg number 22. The staircase leading up to the first lamp in central Yharnam has a detail in the wall texture that depicts what appears to be a child's handprint in the stone. It is a texture, and not a game object, so it cannot be interacted with. But its placement, at exactly the height a small child would reach if pressing their hand against the wall while climbing the stairs, points toward a deliberate design choice, Someone small lived in or passed through this space once, before the hunt, before everything. Easter egg number 23. If you examine the windows of the buildings in central Yharnam that are boarded up, many of them have thin gaps between the boards. Standing close to several of these windows, you can hear faint sounds coming from inside. In most cases, it is ambient noise, but in at least 2 locations in central Yharnam that players have identified, the sound coming through the boarded window is breath. Steady, slow, living breath. There is something alive behind those boards that the game never lets you reach. Easter egg number 24. The hunter badge that you begin the game with, the item that establishes your basic identity as a hunter, has an engraving on its surface that is visible in the inventory art. Most players never zoom in closely enough to read it. The engraving in the game's fictional script translates loosely to a word that scholars of the game's language have interpreted as either returning or remembering, not arriving. The badge does not mark you as a new hunter, it marks you as one who has come back. Easter egg number 25. When you pick up your first weapon in the hunter's dream, there is a very brief audio cue that plays beneath the main pickup sound. It is almost entirely masked by the louder effect. But isolated in audio editing software, it resolves into a human exhalation, a short, soft breath of either relief or resignation. It is not your character's breath. The animation does not trigger a breathing effect at that moment. It is coming from somewhere else in the audio mix, and its origin is not attributed to any listed audio asset. Easter egg number 26. The cleric beast, the first boss of the game, has a behaviour pattern during its fight that most players experience as chaos. But if you track its movement in a careful playthrough, its circling pattern is not random. It always moves in a counterclockwise direction when given the space to do so. Counterclockwise movement appears repeatedly in Bloodborne symbology, in ritual circles found in textures, in NPC movement patterns during transformation sequences, in the rotation of certain enemies during their death animations. The cleric beast is performing something even while it tries to kill you. Easter egg number 27. The gate that leads into central Yharnam has 2 statues flanking it. Those statues depict robed figures with their heads bowed and their hands clasped. They are worn and weathered, but the clasped hands of both statues are positioned so that the fingers interlock in a specific way that mirrors the handshake gesture depicted in healing church iconography found later in the game. The statues are not devotional figures. They are depictions of a transaction, an agreement. Someone made a deal at this gate long before your arrival. Easter egg number 28. Your hunter's starting statistics, regardless of which origin you choose at the start of the game, always include a specific base level of arcane. It is never 0. Even the most physically oriented origins, the ones with the lowest arcane investment, still carry a baseline arcane value that cannot be reduced to nothing. One possible reading is that the act of signing the contract with Gehrman's workshop, the thing you do before the game even begins, automatically endows every hunter with a minimum level of connection to the cosmic forces that arcane power represents. You cannot enter the dream without it. Easter egg number 29. The first hostile hunter you encounter, the one near the central Yharnam shortcut, drops an item when killed. Most players pick this up without paying attention to it, but the specific blood gem that drops has a description fragment that does not appear in any other version of that gem type elsewhere in the game. The fragment reads simply, "This one was close." Close to what is not stated, but the phrasing suggests an evaluation, as though someone was watching this hunter and making a judgment just before the end. Easter egg number 30. The fog walls that block boss encounters in Bloodborne are not the golden fog of Dark Souls. They are red. The specific shade of red used for fog walls in Bloodborne matches the precise colour value used in the item art for contaminated blood, the blood that has been pushed beyond the point of safe use. You do not walk through a magical barrier to fight a boss. You walk through the blood. Every boss arena is already saturated with it before you arrive. Easter egg number 31. There is a lamppost in the Forbidden Woods that is identical in every visible way to the lampposts in central Yharnam, except for one detail. Its base has a small groove carved into it that matches the groove on a specific key item found much later in the game in a completely unrelated area of Yharnam. The two objects were designed to fit together. Whether this was a cut mechanic or a deliberate environmental Easter egg left by the level designers, the connection exists in the game's geometry, even if it serves no function. Easter egg number 32. When you receive messages from other players in the game world, these messages appear as translucent glowing notes on the ground. But in two specific locations in the game, player messages render differently. They appear in a slightly different color temperature, warmer, more orange than the standard blue-white. Both of these locations are associated in the lore with areas that the Healing Church sealed off from public access. One possible reading is that messages left in these locations are processed through a different layer of the dream, one that was established before the main hunting ground framework. Easter egg number 33. The sound of ringing bells in Bloodborne is universally associated with the Bell Maidens, who summon enemy hunters into your world. But if you stand completely still in the hunter's dream and wait long enough, you will hear a very distant, very faint bell toll once. It does not summon anything. It does not trigger any event. It happens on a timer that players have measured at approximately 11 minutes of in-game time spent in the dream. The bell tolls at the 11-minute mark. 11 appears in several other hidden numerical patterns across the game's design. Easter egg number 34. The hunter's dream itself has an architecture that does not entirely make sense when examined from a real-world building logic. The workshop is a shed-like structure. The garden surrounds it. The doll's altar sits at the back. But if you look at the negative space between the buildings, the gap between the workshop wall and the garden fence, it forms a shape that matches the silhouette of a great one, as depicted in the murals inside the Grand Cathedral. The empty space between the objects, in the hunter's dream, was designed to hold that shape. Whether this was always visible and simply unnoticed, or whether it became visible at some point during development, is one of the subtler mysteries of this game. Easter egg number 35. The description of the saw cleaver, your most basic weapon, notes that it is the weapon of choice for the old hunters, those who came before the modern workshop era. But the wear patterns on the saw cleaver's model suggest it has been repaired multiple times. Not maintained. Repaired. The teeth of the saw have been reset, and the blade edge has been reground in a way that indicates extended use well beyond a single owner. The weapon you start with is not new equipment issued to you. It is a hand-me-down from someone who used it extensively and then stopped needing it. Easter egg number 36. Certain walls in Yharnam, particularly in the Cathedral Ward, have a texture that under the right lighting conditions reveals very faint writing behind the surface. This is not a jump scare or a revelation. It is simply there, pressed into the wall as if written first and then plastered over. The writing, when examined by players who have isolated the textures, appears to list names. Not famous names from the lore, simple names, common names, lists of people rather than figures of historical import, which points toward the idea that someone once made a record of everyone the church took in, and then covered it over. Easter egg number 37. The plain doll tells you that she is cold when you ask her about herself. This detail is usually read as a moment of poignant characterization. But the ambient temperature of the hunter's dream, communicated through environmental details like the breath vapor visible in cold areas of the game, is warmer than the physical world of Yharnam. If the doll says she is cold in a space that is demonstrably not cold, then coldness for her is not a temperature. It is a state of being. She is not cold in the room. She is cold in a way that has nothing to do with the room. Easter egg number 38. Among the items you can find in the early game is the pebble, a throwable item with a very mundane description that notes it can be used to distract enemies. The item description also includes a line in smaller text that most players scan past, noting that it is a stone that has been carried a long time, carried, not found. The pebble you pick up was already in someone's pocket or hand. You are not finding discarded debris. You are inheriting someone's nervous habit. Easter egg number 39. There is a specific architectural detail in the lecture hall area that becomes relevant much earlier in the game if you know where to look. The lecture hall is nominally accessed through the Nightmare Frontier in the endgame, but its architecture, the specific style of window frames, and the particular angle of the staircase risers is visible in the background of the panoramic view from the top of the Cathedral Ward Lamp Tower. The lecture hall existed in the physical world of Yharnam before it was displaced into the nightmare. You can see where it used to be. Easter egg number 40. The madman's knowledge items which you consume to gain insight are described as fragments of a great one's lost wisdom. But the word used in the original text for lost is not the word for misplaced or gone. It is the same word used elsewhere in the game to describe something deliberately discarded. The great ones did not lose this knowledge, they threw it away. What you are picking up off the ground and eating is something a cosmic intelligence decided it no longer wanted. Easter egg number 41. Every time your hunter dies and is revived at a lamp, there is a brief audio transition that most players experience as a loading sound. But if you record this audio and slow it down significantly, the sound resolves into something recognizable, a voice making a sound that occupies the space between a sigh and a word. The slowed audio has been described by different players as either a name being spoken or a number being counted. The debate about what it is has been ongoing since the game's release and has never been conclusively resolved. Easter egg number 42. The Healing Church Workshop, a location you can access relatively early in the game, contains a number of research notes and scattered documents as texture props. Most of these are unreadable as normal gameplay, but one document on a desk near the back of the space has a layout that mirrors the patient intake forms visible in Iosefka's clinic. The church was processing its researchers using the same administrative paperwork it used for its patients. The distinction between researcher and subject was, in this institution, largely a matter of which side of the desk you sat on. Easter egg number 43. There is a mirror inside Iosefka's clinic that your hunter walks past during one of the early game sequences. The mirror appears to reflect the room correctly, but if you position the camera at a specific angle and look at the reflection, your hunter is not visible in it. The room is reflected, the furniture and walls, but the hunter's form is absent. One possible reading is that hunters, as dreamers existing partially outside the normal world, do not register in certain physical surfaces. Another reading is simpler and considerably more disturbing. Easter egg number 44. The doll's dress, upon close examination, is sewn from a material that appears in one other place in the game. The trim on her dress matches the trim on the white, ecclesiastical garments worn by the choir members you encounter in the upper cathedral ward. The choir and the doll share the same fabric. Whether this means the doll was made by the choir or simply that the same person designed both is left unclear. But the textile connection places the doll's origin much closer to the highest level of church research than her gentle gardening presence in the dream might suggest. Easter egg number 45. If you find and examine every note left by NPCs throughout the game and arrange them in the order they appear to have been written based on contextual clues, the sequence they form does not match the sequence in which you discover them. They were placed for you to find out of order. The actual chronological sequence of the notes when reconstructed tells a story that is never stated explicitly anywhere in the game. The notes describe a previous cycle in which the player character did not succeed. They are not forewarning, they are a post-mortem. Easter egg number 46. The first time you encounter a beast transformation sequence, watching a human enemy mid-transformation, the process follows a consistent visual logic. The back deforms first, the hands go next, the face is last. This order mirrors the description given in the Ashen Blood research notes for how the Scourge Beast condition progresses. But it also mirrors in reverse the symbolic order of humanity in the game's iconography, which places the face as primary and the spine as foundational. The beast transformation dismantles human identity in the exact reverse order in which that identity is built. Easter egg number 47. The word hunter appears in Bloodborne's item descriptions and NPC dialogue a total number of times that has been counted by dedicated players. The count is not a round number and not an obviously significant one in terms of conventional numerology, but it is exactly one more than the number of hunters depicted in the paintings and murals across all of Yharnam's buildings. One hunter exists in the text of the game who is never depicted visually. Whether this is a counting coincidence or a deliberately embedded detail is something the development team has never confirmed. Easter egg number 48. The workshop table in the Hunter's Dream has a number of tools laid out on it. Among these tools there is one that does not correspond to any visible weapon in the game. A large bladed instrument whose shape does not match any player obtainable or enemy-held weapon. It is simply there, on the table, where Yharnam maintains your equipment, a tool for something that is never shown being done. Its presence has been logged by players who have examined the dream's geometry in detail, and no conclusive explanation for it has ever been offered by anyone with access to the game's development materials. Easter egg number 49. When you first emerge into Yharnam from the clinic, there is a body slumped against the wall on your left. This body is always there. It does not disappear or change regardless of your progress through the game. But if you compare this body's clothing to the clothing worn by the hunter in the opening cinematic, the one who contracts with the clinic before the story begins, they are the same. The body outside the clinic, the very first corpse you walk past in Yharnam, is wearing the same outfit as the figure in the opening scene. One possible reading is that the hunter in the opening cinematic and the corpse are the same person, which means the story begins with you finding yourself already dead. Easter egg number 50. The moon in the Hunter's Dream does not move. Every area of the physical game world has a moon that tracks across the sky as the game's night progresses, corresponding to moon phase changes triggered by major boss kills. The Hunter's Dream moon does not participate in this system. It sits in the same position from the start of the game to the end, unchanged and unmoving, while the moon in the real world shifts and swells. One possible reading is that the Hunter's Dream exists outside of time entirely, anchored to a moment that never changes, running parallel to a world that is constantly moving towards something that the dream is specifically designed to never reach. Chapter 2. The Blood Ministry and the Healing Church Easter egg number 51. The Healing Church is the dominant institutional force in Yharnam, and its visual identity is built around a specific set of symbolic choices that are worth unpacking carefully. The church's primary colour throughout the game is white. White robes, white walls, white altar cloths. But if you examine the pigment used in the church's ceremonial spaces, particularly on the walls of the Grand Cathedral, the white is not paint. It is a plaster that has been mixed with something organic. The texture of the walls in the cathedral has a faint, warm, slightly translucent quality that plaster without an organic additive does not produce. The church's walls may be white for reasons that have nothing to do with cleanliness. Easter egg number 52. The altar inside the Grand Cathedral has a specific proportion that matches no known religious architectural tradition. The dimensions of the altar, its height relative to its width and depth, follow a ratio that appears in one other place in the game. The same ratio governs the proportions of the pit in the Chalice dungeons that contains the Pthumerian elder bosses. The altar in the highest church in Yharnam was built to the proportions of the oldest and deepest burial pits in the earth beneath it. Whether this was a deliberate measurement or a coincidence rooted in shared mathematical instinct is something the game never explains. Easter egg number 53. Vicar Amelia, the boss who guards the Grand Cathedral, is canonically a church official who has voluntarily given herself to the beast scourge as an act of devotion. This is known. But the speed and completeness of her transformation relative to other beast enemies suggests that her transformation was not recent. The muscular development and calcification visible in her beast form requires time. Amelia has been partially transformed for much longer than her position as active vicar would suggest is possible. The church knew what she was becoming. They kept her in the position anyway. Easter egg number 54. The prayer gesture that the hunter can perform is associated in the game with church iconography. But the specific hand position of the prayer gesture, fingers spread rather than laced, matches a different tradition than the interlaced finger gesture depicted on the statues flanking the gate to central Yharnam. There are two distinct prayer traditions visible in the game's gestural language. One is architectural, carved into stone. One is behavioural, performed by hunters. They are not the same gesture. They do not come from the same source. Easter egg number 55. Several healing church items describe the process of ministering to the afflicted using a word that in the original Japanese carries connotations of containing rather than curing. The church's description of its own healing work, when examined in the source language, is closer to a quarantine doctrine than a medical one. The church was not trying to save people from the scourge. It was trying to ensure the scourge proceeded in a controlled and manageable direction toward transformation states it could observe and categorize. Easter egg number 56. The vestments worn by the church doctors encountered in the game have a specific stitching pattern on the back that players rarely see because fighting these enemies typically involves facing them. The stitching pattern on the back of their coats forms an outline that matches the creature form of the cleric beast. Not exactly, but closely enough to be deliberate. The church doctors carry the shape of what they were studying on their backs, hidden in plain sight. Easter egg number 57. There is a document rendered as a texture on a desk in the Healing Church workshop that appears to be a patient record. The patient's name on the document is partially obscured, but the visible characters suggest it is a name that appears in shortened form in one of the gravestones in the hunter's dream. The gravestone contains only initials. The document in the workshop may be the record of the person buried, symbolically, in the dream. A church patient who became a hunter who ended up as a gravestone, all within the same closed system. Easter egg number 58. The stained glass in the Grand Cathedral depicts figures in robes ascending toward a central light. This is a conventional religious image, but if you look at the postures of the ascending figures, they are not looking up toward the light. Their heads are turned away from it, angled toward something outside the frame of the image. They are ascending towards something they are deliberately not watching. The reverence depicted in the stained glass is not for the light. It is for whatever is beside the light, just out of the picture. Easter egg number 59. The Healing Church's administrative structure, pieced together from item descriptions and NPC dialogue, has a layer that does not appear in its publicly stated hierarchy. Between the choir at the top and the regular clergy below, there is a reference in the Upper Cathedral Ward's environmental documents to a group identified only by a single word that translates as the intermediaries. These individuals appear in no other part of the official church hierarchy. Their function is never stated. They exist in the paperwork and nowhere else in the game, which suggests they were either cut content or people the church preferred not to formally acknowledge. Easter egg number 60. Every church lamp you encounter in the game, the ones that serve as fast travel points, have a specific ornamental design at their base. If you look at the symbol cast into the metal at the base of each church lamp, it is not the standard church emblem that appears on vestments and altar cloths. It is an older symbol, one that appears in the Chalice dungeon murals in association with the Pithumerian civilization that predates the church by centuries. The lamps were not made by the church, they were inherited from something older, and the church simply lit them. Easter egg number 61. The bloodletting beast found in the Chalice dungeons is one of the most physically extreme enemy forms in the game. Its item association and location suggest it is what happens when the beast scourge progresses entirely unchecked to its most extreme possible endpoint. But the proportions of the bloodletting beast's skeleton, when compared to the skeletal remains visible in certain Chalice dungeon chambers, suggest that the original organism before transformation was significantly larger than a normal human. The bloodletting beast was not a person who became a beast. It was something that was already not quite a person before it transformed. Easter egg number 62. The choir, the highest order of the healing church, has an item description for their bell that reads that it was used to call beings of higher planes. This framing suggests the choir saw themselves as petitioners reaching upward towards something greater, but the architecture of the upper cathedral ward tells a different story. The spaces are not designed for looking up. The sightlines are all horizontal and inward. Whatever the choir was calling, they expected it to arrive at eye level, not descend from above. They were not praying, they were inviting. Easter egg number 63. There is a very specific painting style used throughout Yharnam's buildings that is associated with church patronage. The paintings share compositional traits that suggest they came from the same school or were commissioned by the same office. But one painting in the game does not follow this style. It is found in a room that the church's architecture suggests should have been part of their administrative space, but the painting depicts no church imagery. It depicts a landscape that does not correspond to any location in the game, a shoreline with something in the water that the artist appears to have stopped painting before finishing. The unfinished painting was left on the church's wall. They never removed it. Easter egg number 64. The communion item, a consumable that increases your insight by granting knowledge through the consumption of flesh, has an item description that uses 3 distinct verbs across its text. Those verbs are remember, accept, and become, in that order. Communion in this game is not symbolic. It is a literal and staged process in which memory is first installed, then accommodated, and then integrated into the self. What you are doing when you consume these items is not gaining information. You are reorganizing who you are around the information you have taken in. Easter egg number 65. The church's records, pieced together from environmental details and item texts, suggest that the institution tracked the transformation rate of its clergy with a level of precision that implies long-term monitoring. The transformation schedules, implied by the evidence, are too consistent to be coincidental. The church was not reacting to an outbreak. It was running a program with expected timelines and measurable milestones. The horror of Yharnam is not a catastrophe that got out of hand. It is a project that arrived exactly where it was designed to arrive. Easter egg number 66. Lawrence, the first vicar, the founder of the healing church, appears in the game only as a head in a boss fight and as a skull relic kept in the Grand Cathedral. These two objects do not have the same cranial proportions. The skull in the cathedral and the head of the beast in the DLC are measurably different shapes. One possible reading is that the skull in the cathedral is not actually Lawrence's. The church placed something else in the reliquary and called it by his name, which would be consistent with an institution that consistently prioritized narrative control over factual accuracy. Easter egg number 67. Several of the more advanced church hunters you encounter in the cathedral ward area carry a very specific combination of items. They carry hunter tools, which require arcane ability, and they carry standard firearms, which are conventional weapons. This combination is not the standard hunter loadout. It suggests that certain church hunters were trained in both the conventional hunting methods and the newer arcane methods simultaneously. The double training suggests the church anticipated a point where conventional hunting would be insufficient and prepared for it quietly, well before that point arrived. Easter egg number 68. The Greatest Chalice, one of the deepest and most cosmically significant of the Chalice dungeons, is described as having housed kin of the cosmos, meaning great one-adjacent beings, rather than the beast-scourge creatures that populate the shallower dungeons. But the architectural style of the Eyes Chalice dungeon chambers is not entirely distinct from the upper cathedral architecture. Certain arch designs and wall ornamentation styles appear in both. The cathedral ward and the deepest cosmic chalice were built by groups that shared an architect, or a blueprint, or a vision. They were always oriented toward the same thing. Easter egg number 69. The church doctors you fight throughout the game wield weapons dipped in a substance that the game identifies as numbing mist, an agent that dulls the senses and makes patients easier to handle. The fact that the church's medical staff carry combat-ready weapons loaded with sedative compounds reframes every encounter with them. They are not fighting hunters because the hunters are a threat. They are administering treatment by force to whatever they encounter. In the church's framework, you are the patient who has not yet accepted care. Easter egg number 70. Among the textures in the Grand Cathedral, there is a section of floor near the main altar that is a slightly different shade from the rest. It is not immediately obvious. The difference is subtle, a warmer tone to the stone. If you compare this floor section to the appearance of blood-stained stone that has been cleaned and repolished, the colouring matches precisely. That section of the cathedral floor was heavily blood-stained at some point and was cleaned and refinished. The altar of the highest church in Yharnam was the site of something that produced enough blood to permanently alter the colour of the stone beneath it, and then the church cleaned it up and kept holding services. Easter egg number 71. The password that the player is asked to give at certain NPC doors throughout the early game is never stated in dialogue. You simply use a gesture or an item and the door opens. But this mechanic of recognition without spoken identification suggests a system of identification that predates language. The hunters identifying each other through shared gesture or material token rather than words points toward a tradition that existed before the healing church formalized hunter culture, something instinctive and older. Easter egg number 72. The Hunter of Hunters Covenant, which Eileen represents, occupies a paradoxical position in the church hierarchy. It is simultaneously sanctioned by the church, as Eileen implies, and outside church control, as her actions demonstrate. The church's relationship with this covenant mirrors its relationship with most of the forces it claims authority over. Nominal acknowledgement combined with functional non-interference. The church understood very early that there were things it could not control, and its strategy was to name them rather than govern them. Easter egg number 73. There is an item in the game that, when its description is read against the description of another, seemingly unrelated item found in an entirely different area, reveals a shared origin that the game never explicitly states. The formless Udun rune, associated with the formless Great One of the same name, uses phrasing that reappears almost verbatim in the description of a mundane item found in the Healing Church workshop. The mundane item is administrative in nature. This points toward the possibility that routine church paperwork was written using language derived from Great One scripture, so casually integrated into institutional procedure that no one working with the paperwork would have recognized what they were reciting. Easter egg number 74. The way the church's clerics move in combat is different from the way hunters and beast enemies move. Beast enemies follow an animalistic movement logic, lunging and circling. Hunters follow a trained combat logic, feinting and repositioning. Church clerics move in a way that follows neither pattern. They advance in straight lines, they do not circle or flank, and they continue advancing even after receiving damage that would cause most enemies to interrupt their movements. They move like people who have been instructed not to be afraid, and who have been instructed so thoroughly that the instruction has overridden something more fundamental. Easter egg number 75. The word healing in the game's various uses within church documentation refers consistently to a transformation toward a higher state rather than a restoration of a prior one. The church was not trying to return people to health. It was trying to advance them towards something it considered superior to health. The horror of the blood treatment is not that it failed to heal people, it is that it succeeded entirely in doing what it was designed to do. Easter egg number 76. There is a very faint and rarely noted detail in the architecture of the cathedral ward that suggests the space was designed to funnel people toward the grand cathedral, regardless of where they entered from. If you map the angles of the alleys, the placement of impassable debris, and the directions in which staircases face, every path through the cathedral ward resolves into a route that eventually points toward the cathedral entrance. The cathedral ward is not a residential and commercial district that happens to contain a church. It is an approach, and the entire district is the corridor. Easter egg number 77. When Vicar Amelia falls in her boss fight and grants you the gold pendant needed to access the Forbidden Woods, there is a detail in her dying animation that most players miss. Her hand reaches forward as she falls, the hand that held the pendant, and for a fraction of a second before the death animation fully plays out, her fingers close around something that is not the pendant. They close around empty space. She is reaching for something she cannot touch, or something that was never there to begin with, or something that the player cannot see. Easter egg number 78. The church bells in Yharnam ring at intervals that, if mapped against a clock, form a pattern that does not correspond to any standard bell ringing schedule. They do not ring on the hour. They do not ring in any obvious pattern. But if you plot the ring intervals against the pattern of enemy respawn cycles in the world, the bells and the respawns are synchronized. The bells mark the moment of each cycle reset. The city is not mourning or celebrating when it rings its bells. It is resetting, and the bells are the signal. Easter egg number 79. A particular unused texture file, examined by players who have accessed the game's data, depicts what appears to be a church vestment with an embroidered pattern that was removed from the final game. The pattern is recognizable as an early design of the amygdala creature, one of the game's major cosmic horror enemies. The vestment was designed, embroidered with the amygdala's shape, and then removed from the game before release. Its presence in the files suggests the church's relationship to the amygdala was more explicit and more openly acknowledged at an earlier stage of development, and was subsequently obscured. Easter egg number 80. The Healing Church's official doctrine, as stated in its publicly accessible documents, an NPC dialogue, holds that the blood of the Healing Church is pure and safe. But the item description of the blood of Ariana, a blood item you can obtain from a specific NPC, notes that it is descended from the line of the old gods, suggesting extraordinary quality. If blood of divine lineage is described as extraordinary, then the Church's standard healing blood, presented as the baseline, must be compared against something. The Church knew what divine blood felt like. Its standard product was a deliberate approximation, optimized for production volume rather than purity. Easter egg number 81. The layout of the Healing Church's administrative records, visible in the workshop area, suggests a filing system that organized its subjects by transformation progress rather than by intake date or personal identity. People were not individuals in this system. They were data points on a progression scale. The organizational logic of the church's paperwork is the organizational logic of a research project, not a medical institution. And the difference between those two things is exactly what the game wants you to understand. Easter egg number 82. Every major boss death in the cathedral ward and its approaches triggers a specific audio effect that plays in the hunter's dream when you return after the kill. The dream's ambient music subtly shifts in pitch, slightly downward, for each major kill you make in that area. By the time you've cleared the cathedral ward entirely, the hunter's dream background music is playing in a key that is noticeably lower than where it started. The dream registers loss. The world gets darker in a literal, measurable, musical sense as you do what you came to do. Easter egg number 83. The pungent blood cocktail, an item you can throw to lure beasts with the scent of blood, has a detail in its item description that most players skim past. It notes that the formula is a church recipe, the Church of Healing, the institution devoted to the ethical administration of blood as medicine, developed and standardized a recipe for using blood to manipulate beast behavior. The application they had in mind for this recipe is not stated, but having developed and documented it suggests they had a use for it that extended beyond simple crowd control. Easter egg number 84. There is a portrait in the cathedral ward that depicts a woman in church vestments. She is not named in any caption or plate, but her physical features, if compared to the appearance of the plain doll, share a specific detail. The way her hands are positioned in the portrait, resting in her lap, with the right thumb pressed against the base of the left index finger, is identical to the doll's default idle hand position. The portrait may depict the person the doll was modelled after. If so, she was a churchwoman. She was in the cathedral before she was in the dream. Easter egg number 85. One of the hardest to access areas in the cathedral ward contains a room that appears to have been a nursery at some point in the past. The furniture scale and the specific objects visible in the room, rendered as texture props, are consistent with the space designed for infants. The nursery is inside a healing church administrative building. The church was housing infants in its administrative spaces, which points toward either a church orphanage program or something considerably more specific regarding what kinds of subjects the earliest blood research required. Easter egg number 86. The Healing Church's workshop does not actually contain any blood processing equipment. Given that the church's entire function revolves around blood as medicine, the absence of any visible extraction, purification, or storage apparatus in its research workshop is conspicuous. The actual work of blood processing happens somewhere else. The workshop is not the source, it is the distribution point. Whatever the church was doing to the blood before it reached the workshop, it was doing it in a space that is either inaccessible or no longer part of the game's explorable world. Easter egg number 87. The silver coins you can find and use in the game carry an item description that refers to them as being minted by the Healing Church. The imagery on the coins, invisible to the player in normal gameplay, but visible in extracted art assets, depicts not the standard church emblem, but a creature with multiple limbs reaching downward from above, which is a visual description that matches the amygdala. The church was literally putting the image of the amygdala on its currency, in the pocket of every citizen who used money in Yharnam, as a detail so small and so familiar it would never be examined. Easter egg number 88. When you fight the blood-starved beast, an enemy associated with the early church hunters, and the old Loran chalice, there is a moment partway through the fight where its behaviour changes. In the second phase, it begins moving in a pattern that mirrors the movement of a bell maiden. It walks slowly, rings nothing, but follows the same lateral movement logic as the summoners you will not encounter until much later in the game. The blood-starved beast learned something from the church's research. It carries a behavioural echo of a much more advanced stage of the church's project, embedded in an early game boss, Easter egg number 89. The Holy Blade, the Kirk Hammer, and other church-associated weapons all share a design language that emphasises mass and downward force. They are not slashing weapons. They are weapons designed to apply pressure from above. In the context of hunting beasts who are often on the ground or moving low, this design preference makes practical sense. But in the context of the church's larger project, weapons that force things down and keep them there suggest a specific philosophy about what hunting is for. Not elimination, suppression. Easter egg number 90. There is a single room in the game that is not accessible during normal play, but whose existence is implied by a specific architectural gap in the cathedral ward. If you look at the exterior of the cathedral from the garden below, there is a window in the back of the building at ground level that does not correspond to any interior room you can access. The window is there. The room behind it is sealed. Given the placement, the room would be directly beneath the main altar, which in the architectural vocabulary of the game is not a storage space. It is a foundation chamber. Easter egg number 91. Ligarius, the boss encountered at Cainhurst Castle, is a member of the church's Executioner Covenant, a group dedicated to eliminating those who used forbidden blood. But his item description and his position at Cainhurst suggest he was stationed there not to execute Annalise, but to prevent her from being found by the church's own upper hierarchy. He was not guarding against her. He was guarding against the church's own interest in her. The executioners were, at some point, deployed against the church itself. Easter egg number 92. The Cainhurst armour set, acquired from the castle, has a description that notes it is lined with a material that resists the cold. Cainhurst is not a cold location in the conventional sense. The castle is chilly, but the armour is designed for a level of cold that the environment does not produce. One possible reading is that the Cainhurst lineage, the vile blood nobles, lived in the presence of something that produced cold the way a great one produces cold in the areas where they are most present. The castle was colder before, when the thing it sheltered was still actively there. Easter egg number 93. The vile blood covenant, centered on Annalise, is described in opposition to the Executioner's Covenant in terms of their stated goals and practices, but the specific ritual items associated with both covenants use the same raw material. Both the Executioner's medals and the vile blood offerings are made from the same type of metal, described in identical terms in their respective item descriptions. The two opposing factions are using the same substance, drawn from the same source, to pursue objectives that appear opposite but may ultimately be oriented toward the same thing. Easter egg number 94. Cainhurst Castle contains a room filled with books and documents that, based on their physical characteristics, are older than the Healing Church, but the filing system visible in the room's shelving arrangement uses a categorization method also used in the Healing Church's workshop. The Cainhurst nobility and the Healing Church were using the same administrative system. Whether one borrowed it from the other, or both inherited it from a common ancestor institution, is one of the quieter and more intriguing structural mysteries in the game. Easter egg number 95. Queen Annalise, the vile blood monarch, is unkillable in the standard sense. You can fight her, knock her down, and apparently kill her, but she returns. Her item description notes that she is sustained by her vile blood nature, but the specific word in the original text for sustained is the same word used in descriptions of the doll's existence in the Hunter's Dream, the same word used for things that are maintained by an external will rather than by their own. Annalise's immortality is not intrinsic. Someone or something is choosing to keep her alive. Easter egg number 96. The specific dialogue Annalise uses when you offer her vile blood is formally structured in a way that mirrors ecclesiastical liturgy from the church documents visible elsewhere in the game. Her court is gone and her castle is in ruins, but she still speaks in the language of a functioning institution. She is performing a ceremony whose congregation has been dead for generations. She is the last practitioner of a rite she cannot stop performing, and the game never frames this as strange. It is simply how she speaks. Easter egg number 97. There is a detail in the Canehurst Castle environment that is only visible if you take the carriage approach slowly and pay attention to the road surface. The road leading to the castle is paved with stones that have individual markings pressed into them, small sigils that appear one at a time as you progress along the route. These sigils taken together form a sequence that matches a sequence appearing in the Chalice dungeon murals associated with ritual summoning. The road to Canehurst is a ritual approach. Every step a visitor took toward the castle was part of an invocation they were not told they were performing. Easter egg number 98. The item you use to access Canehurst, the Canehurst summons, is a letter of invitation. Its item description notes that it was written in blood. Blood letters appear in other church-adjacent documents as a sign of formal covenant binding. The Canehurst summons is not an invitation in the social sense. It is a contract. Someone was establishing a binding relationship between the bearer and Canehurst, one that carried weight regardless of whether the bearer understood what they were agreeing to. Easter egg number 99. The executioner outfit, worn by Alfred and the executioner enemies you encounter, has a hood design that obscures the wearer's vision significantly. The eye holes are extremely narrow. The executioners are functionally partially blinded by their own uniform. Given that they are tasked with tracking and killing vile bloods, who are described as having distinctive blood that can be detected by those who are sensitive to it, the hood design suggests the executioner's primary sense modality for tracking their targets was not vision. They hunted by another sense entirely, one the uniform was designed not to impair. Easter egg number 100. The church's most fundamental contradiction is built into its architecture. The Grand Cathedral, the highest point of church authority, sits directly above the tunnel entrance to the Chalice dungeon system, the ancient burial ground network that predates the church by centuries. The church built its highest expression of spiritual authority on top of the most direct access point to the oldest and most dangerous knowledge in Yharnam. Whether this was coincidence, pragmatism, or deliberate symbolism, the effect is the same. The church stands on what it claims to have transcended. Chapter 3. The City of Yharnam and its Living Secrets. Easter egg number 101. Central Yharnam is the first major area of the game, and it contains a level design detail that rewards obsessive study. If you draw a map of Central Yharnam by hand, tracing only the paths that lead away from the starting area, the resulting shape of the connected paths forms an outline that is not a random layout. It is approximately the outline of a hand, fingers extended, with the lamp in the starting area, sitting roughly where a wrist would be. The first area of the game, the beginning of the hunt, is laid out in the shape of the thing the game is most concerned with, an open, reaching hand. Easter egg number 102. The dogs that appear as enemies throughout Yharnam are not the wild or feral creatures they might initially appear to be. If you look at their textures, several of them have fur patterns that indicate they were once owned. The patterns of lighter and darker fur on some dogs match the coloration of domestic breeds rather than working or hunting breeds. These were people's pets before the night of the hunt began. They have been outside for what the timeline suggests is a very long time. Easter egg number 103. The residential buildings of Central Yharnam, the ones you climb through and over during normal progress, have interiors that tell a story through their prop placement. In many rooms, a meal is set on the table. In several rooms, children's toys are visible on the floor. In one specific room, there is an open book on a chair beside a fireplace, positioned as if someone set it down, intending to come back to it. The city was interrupted in the middle of life. Whatever happened did not give people time to understand that it was ending. Easter egg number 104. The fire that the mob in central Yharnam is gathered around in the early game never goes out. Throughout the entire game, regardless of your progress or the time elapsed in the story, that fire continues burning. The mob around it respawns, the night continues, but the fire is never exhausted. Either the mob is continuously feeding it, which requires them to have a fuel source that is not visible in the environment, or the fire is not natural. It burns because something in this spot has always burned. Easter egg number 105. Yharnam's architecture has a very specific relationship with height. The city is built vertically, layered, with upper districts physically elevated above lower ones. But the arrangement of these vertical layers does not follow a wealth or status pattern the way a conventional city would. The cathedral ward is high, but the Forbidden Woods entry, which houses dangerous and poor communities, is at a similar elevation. The city was not stratified by class. It was stratified by something else, by proximity to a specific geographical feature that the game suggests is geological rather than social. Easter egg number 106. The brick used in Yharnam's construction has a specific colour and texture that materials scholars within the game community have compared to descriptions of brick found in Pthumerian architectural texts referenced in item descriptions. Yharnam was built from materials that originated in or near the Pthumerian ruins beneath it. The city was not built on top of the ruins, it was built out of them. Every wall and street in Yharnam is assembled from the dismantled remnants of what came before. Easter egg number 107. Several of the lanterns hanging in central Yharnam contain a flame that is a slightly different colour than the others. Most flames in the game are warm orange-yellow. These specific lanterns burn with a hint of blue at the base. Blue fire in Bloodborne's visual language is associated with arcane energy and cosmic presence. The lanterns in central Yharnam that burn blue are, without exception, located in positions that have a clear sightline to the Grand Cathedral. They are oriented toward it. They mark a path. Easter egg number 108. The manhole covers and drainage grates in Yharnam streets are embossed with a design that is almost never examined because they appear as floor texture, and most players look forward rather than down. The embossed design on these utility covers depicts a worm-like figure coiled around a central point, which is a motif that appears in the most ancient tier of Chalice Dungeon iconography. The city's plumbing and drainage system was built with iconography that predates the city itself. Yharnam was drained from the beginning by infrastructure that was never entirely human in origin. Easter egg number 109. If you listen to the ambient audio of the Forbidden Woods without attacking or being attacked, the background soundscape includes bird calls and insect noise consistent with a living forest. But tucked into the audio, so infrequent that it is easy to miss entirely, is a sound that does not belong to any forest. It is a sound that resembles a child reciting something in a low voice. The audio file that produces this sound, when isolated by players who have accessed the game's audio data, is listed in the files as a voice line, but has no associated speaker character and no visible trigger in the game world. It plays from the environment. The Forbidden Woods produces a child's voice that belongs to no child in the game. Easter egg number 110. The transformation of Yharnam's citizens into beasts follows a pattern that players who have studied the enemy placements carefully have noted is not random. The degree of transformation in the beast enemies you encounter corresponds to the proximity of those enemies to specific architectural landmarks. Enemies near the Grand Cathedral are more transformed than enemies in the outer residential areas. The scourge is not spreading evenly from a point of origin. It is intensifying around a centre, which means the centre is not merely nearby. It is the source. Easter egg number 111. The windows of Yharnam's buildings that are illuminated from within, suggesting people are still inside, are lit in a way that does not match the behaviour of candles or oil lamps. The light from these windows is too consistent, without the flicker variation that fire-based light sources produce. The warm light coming through the windows of occupied buildings in Yharnam is steady and sourceless, which suggests the interior light is not coming from the people inside or from their hearths. Something else is producing it, and the people inside are simply in its presence. Easter egg number 112. The Forbidden Woods has a section that is almost never fully explored because it contains no major rewards and no critical path items. But within this section, there is a tree whose base has been carved. The carving is not decorative. It depicts a map, rendered crudely but identifiable. The map shows Yharnam in a layout that broadly matches the game's actual geography, but it includes a location marked on the edge of the carved map that does not correspond to any area in the game. Someone was in the Forbidden Woods, carving maps, and they knew about a place that the game itself does not show you. Easter egg number 113. The name Yharnam is never given an origin story in the game's explicit text, but there is a character referenced obliquely in the Chalice dungeon lore, a Pythumerian figure associated with a specific ritual space, whose name in the archaic notation of that civilization's writing system is phonetically close to a variant of Yharnam. The city may be named after a Pythumerian individual. Whether she was honoured by the naming or whether the naming was a trap, an ongoing invocation of her name across centuries of urban existence, is one possible reading the lore supports. Easter egg number 114. The scarecrow-like figures mounted on poles in the Forbidden Woods are constructed from materials that include what appear to be actual garments, not fabrications. Specific texture details on these figures' clothing match the clothing worn by the serpent-enhanced enemies in the same area. The scarecrows are not warnings or decorations. They are the actual clothing of people who became the snake-infested enemies, now walking beneath them. Someone put up the clothes after the people wearing them had changed enough to no longer need them. Easter egg number 115. Hemwick Charnel Lane, a mid-game area, contains a detail that is easy to miss because of the overwhelming business of fighting witch enemies and avoiding environmental hazards. Among the background props in Hemwick, there are candles arranged in patterns on the floor of several rooms. These candle patterns are not random. They form sigils. Some of those sigils match the sigils visible in the Chalice dungeon ritual chambers. The Hemwick witches were performing Chalice dungeon rituals in the surface world. They had access to the same knowledge the healing church spent enormous resources to reach through institutional channels. Easter egg number 116. The Witch of Hemwick boss fight involves two witches, though only one is initially visible. The second witch becomes visible as the fight progresses. This twin structure is never commented on in any item description or dialogue. But in the game's lore about Carol runes, twin or paired entities are referenced in the context of the formless Uden, the great one associated with sound and unseen presence. The witches of Hemwick may not be two separate individuals with the same role. They may be a single consciousness occupying two bodies, a reference to Uden's nature as a being that exists without singular physical form. Easter egg number 117. The Forbidden Woods leads eventually to Byrgenwerth, the academic institution where the study of the Great Ones began. But if you map the geography of the woods, the path from Yharnam to Byrgenwerth is not the most direct route. The woods wind and loop in a way that takes you significantly out of the most efficient path. The Forbidden Woods is not actually the most direct route to Byrgenwerth. Something in the woods' design redirects travellers, adds time, adds exposure to the dangers within. The woods themselves function as a delay mechanism between the city and the knowledge at its centre. Easter egg number 118. Byrgenwerth's library contains books arranged on shelves in a specific order. The spines of the visible books while individually not readable as game objects, have a color coding visible in the environment. Red, white in alternating pairs along certain shelves. This color pairing appears in one other context in the game: the color of the eyes of the celestial mobs you encounter in the area, the human transformed creatures with eyes growing from their bodies. The library and the people it produced are color-coded as the same thing. Easter egg number 119. Master Willem, the figure sitting in the chair at the back of Bjergenwerth's grounds, appears to be a nearly catatonic old man. But if you approach him from specific angles and look at his eyes, they are not closed or unfocused. They're fixed on a specific point in the middle distance. That point, projected as a straight line from his gaze, passes through the wall of the building behind him and out the other side, toward Lake Astral and the entrance to Moonside Lake. He is watching the lake. He has been watching the lake. He cannot look away and may not wish to. Easter egg number 120. The Forbidden Woods snakes, the serpent enemies that have partially absorbed or replaced the humans who became them, move in a way that does not follow the locomotion of actual constrictors. They move more like the movement patterns of the amygdala, long and deliberate, with extended pauses between motion cycles. The snake enemies are not biomechanically snake-like. They were not made from snakes. The snake element is a surface transformation, and the underlying movement logic belongs to something that does not exist in normal nature. Easter egg number 121. The research hall in the Old Hunters DLC contains windows that look out onto a specific orientation. The windows face a direction that, if aligned with the actual Yharnam geography, would place them facing away from the city centre. All the research in the hall was conducted with its windows pointing away from Yharnam. The researchers were deliberately not looking at the city. They were looking at whatever was beyond it, further out, further up, whatever was above the horizon in the direction away from everything they had already charted. Easter egg number 122. There are crows in Yharnam that appear as environmental props perching on rooftops and railings. These crows are not merely decorative. If you watch them across multiple visits to the same location, you'll notice that their positions change between your visits. The crows are not static, they relocate. Whether this is a deliberately animated ambient system, or whether it is an oversight in the prop placement logic, the effect is the same. The crows in Yharnam are paying attention to where you are, and choosing where to be in response. Easter egg number 123. The street vendors and market stalls visible in the environment of Yharnam's public spaces show specific product categories, frozen in their last moment of commerce. One stall contains medical supplies, one contains tools, one appears to have sold books, but no stall in any Yharnam market space sells food. There is no food for sale anywhere in the pre-hunt public spaces of the city. Whatever arrangement the citizens of Yharnam had with their food supply, it was not commercial. It was administered, distributed by an institution rather than purchased individually. Easter egg number 124. The old Yharnam area, a burnt-out district sealed off from the main city, contains architectural details that suggest it was once the most developed and densely populated part of Yharnam. The building size and street width in Old Yharnam, for the section still visible, are larger than in central Yharnam. The district that was destroyed was the largest. What Gascoigne's predecessor burned was not a slum or a peripheral zone. It was the centre, and the current central Yharnam is the replacement built afterward. Easter egg number 125. There is a sequence in the game where, after certain major events, the ambient lighting of Yharnam's main areas shifts toward a more deeply red tone. This shift is usually attributed to the blood moon that appears as the story progresses. But if you track the exact moment the shift occurs, it does not coincide with the blood moon's visual appearance in the sky. The light changes before the moon is fully visible. The source of the red light is not the moon. The moon is reflecting something that is already lit from below. Easter egg number 126. The water that flows through Yharnam's aqueducts and gutters is a specific shade of brown that, in the game's colour palette, sits between the colour of the healing blood and the colour of contaminated blood. The city's water supply is permanently tinted with blood at a concentration that is sub-medicinal but non-trivial. The citizens of Yharnam have been drinking dilute healing blood in their water for generations. Whatever the long-term physiological and psychological effects of chronic low-dose blood exposure are, the citizens of Yharnam have been the study population for that question for a very long time. Easter egg number 127. The specific lamp that serves as your return point in central Yharnam is placed in a position that, when you look at its location on the overall map, sits at the exact geometric centre of the accessible central Yharnam area. It is not near the entrance, it is not at a major junction, it is at the centre. The lamp is placed precisely at the midpoint of the district, as though whoever placed it calculated the centre and put the lamp there intentionally, marking a point of balance in a space that the rest of the game will continually pull out of balance. Easter egg number 128. The music that plays in the cathedral ward is distinct from the music in central Yharnam in a way that is more than tonal. The cathedral ward music includes a vocal element, a very low, very distant voice holding a single pitch. The central Yharnam music does not include this vocal element. The voice enters precisely when you cross the architectural threshold between the two districts, even if you approach the boundary from the central Yharnam side. The cathedral ward begins being heard before it is entered. Easter egg number 129. If you complete the game on New Game Plus and return to the very first area, the enemies have changed in their beast progression stage, more transformed than in the base game. This is a standard difficulty scaling mechanic, but if you compare the enemy models carefully, it is not just the stats that have changed. The specific beast forms of the respawned enemies in New Game Plus are different variants than those in the base game, suggesting they are at a different point in their transformation, not just more powerful versions of the same thing. The cycle has not simply repeated, it has advanced. Easter egg number 130. The single most replayed moment in Bloodborne's opening is the transformation scene in the clinic, where you're attacked by the first beast and the blood transfusion begins. This scene is always the same. It does not change between playthroughs. It does not acknowledge that you may have completed the game before. But if you compare the facial expression of the figure performing the transfusion very closely between your first and subsequent playthroughs, it is marginally different. A slight drop at the corner of the mouth, a different orientation of the eyes. The figure knows something in the second playthrough that they did not show in the first. Easter egg number 131. Gascoigne's grave, visible in the cathedral ward after his death, is marked with a standard hunter's headstone, but the date inscribed on the headstone in the game's fictional notation system predates the events of the game by a significant margin. The headstone marks a date before Gascoigne's apparent death in the story. One possible reading is that Gascoigne was already considered dead, in some official sense, before the night you killed him. He had been removed from the records, erased from the church's active rolls, at a point that had nothing to do with your intervention. Easter egg number 132. The specific way that the moon appears in Yharnam's sky, the arc it traces and the size at which it is rendered during the early game, places it at an apparent distance that is inconsistent with the actual moon. The moon in Yharnam's sky is closer. In the early game, it is moderately closer. As the blood moon phase approaches, it becomes significantly closer. The moon in Yharnam is descending. The approach of the blood moon is not metaphorical. The physical object is moving toward the city. Easter egg number 133. The amygdalae, the enormous cosmic entities that cling to buildings throughout Yharnam and become visible to the player after gaining sufficient insight, are present in the world from the very beginning of the game. They are on the buildings in the first area. but zero insight players cannot see them. This means that for a player's entire first approach through central Yharnam, giant entities are sitting on every major building, watching as players walk completely unaware beneath arms that could reach down at any moment. The horror is not that they appear after you learn to see them. It is that they were always there while you walked beneath them blind. Easter egg number 134. The item description of the pebble, the most mundane item in the game, contains the most mundane text in the game. But the specific word choice used to describe what the pebble does, distract, appears in one other item description. It appears in the description of the tonsil stone, an item given to you by an NPC that turns out to transport you to an area where a great one is waiting. The tonsil stone also uses the word distract, but the thing it distracts, or the thing whose attention it turns toward you, is left unnamed. The most basic item and the most cosmically significant item share a word, placed deliberately by the writers, connecting the human scale and the cosmic scale through a single four-syllable verb. Easter egg number 135. Yharnam's clock tower, visible in the skyline of several areas, is not a gameplay element. Its clock face is never readable in normal gameplay because the tower exists only as background geometry. But if you isolate its texture in the game data, the clock face displays a specific time. It is not midnight. It is not any particularly dramatic hour. It displays 3:47. This time appears in one other place in the game, as a date notation in a document texture found in the Healing Church workshop. The clock in Yharnam's skyline displays the time at which something specific was scheduled to happen. Easter egg number 136. The shadows of Yharnam, boss enemies encountered in the Forbidden Woods, are three figures in black robes who fight as a coordinated unit. Their fighting style involves fire, swords, and snake summoning, representing a combination of abilities that no other enemy type in the game uses simultaneously. This combination precisely matches the combination described in a fragmented Chalice dungeon document as the trial of worthiness that Thumerians were required to pass before being granted access to the deepest burial grounds. You are not simply fighting three enemies, you are being evaluated using a test that predates Yharnam by thousands of years. Easter egg number 137. The first NPC that addresses you directly in the game world, rather than through a door, is a man hanging from a window above the central Yharnam alley. He warns you about the beasts. His dialogue is specific and relatively detailed for someone in his position. He knows about hunters. He knows what the night means. He refers to the Healing Church by name. For a terrified civilian sheltering from a riot, he has a striking level of institutional knowledge. One possible reading is that he is not a civilian. He is someone who is inside the system and chose the window over the street. Easter egg number 138. The corpses of the Pithumerian descendants, who appear as bosses in the Chalice dungeons, collapse in a specific direction when defeated. They always fall toward a specific compass orientation that, if you track it through the rotational randomness of procedurally generated Chalice spaces, consistently aligns with the direction of the deepest Chalice dungeon layer. Even in death, even in random space, they orient toward the bottom. Something at the base of the Chalice dungeons exerts a pull that persists through death. Easter egg number 139. There are specific cobblestones in central Yharnam that have been pushed up slightly from beneath, creating small raised sections in the street. These cobblestones are clustered in a loose pattern in the area directly above the transition zone between the surface city and the upper sections of the Chalice dungeon system. Whatever is beneath is exerting pressure upward. The streets of Yharnam are not stable. They are rising over what is buried beneath them. Easter egg number 140. The bell-shaped windows in Yharnam's domestic architecture appear throughout the city and are usually read as a regional aesthetic preference. But the specific proportions of these bell-shaped windows, measured against the game's scale, match the proportions of the Kos parasite item, an endgame item associated with the fishing hamlet and the corpse of the Great One Kos. The bell window shape is not a regional style choice. It is a memorial built into Yharnam's domestic architecture from its earliest construction phase for something that died at the coast before the city was established. Easter egg number 141. The candles in the hunter's dream never visibly burn down. They maintain the same height from the beginning of the game to the end. This is usually explained as a practical limitation of the dream space, which does not follow normal physical laws. But the specific candles in the dream are the same model as the candles used in the Grand Cathedral's ritual spaces. The dream uses cathedral candles. Wherever the materials for the dream came from, they came from the same place that furnished the church's highest holy site. Easter egg number 142. The celestial emissary, the boss you fight in the upper cathedral ward, is a cluster of small blue creatures that coalesce into a larger form for the final phase of the fight. The smaller creatures, when killed individually before the main fight begins, each produce a small amount of blood echoes. If you count the number of individual creatures visible in the small form phase, and then count the total blood echo value produced by killing all of them, the per creature echo value matches the per creature echo value of the School of Mensis researchers, who appear later. The emissary is made of researchers. Each small blue body was a person. Easter egg number 143. The lecture building, accessed from the Nightmare Frontier, is a school, but contains no desks for students. The only seating in the lecture building is the chairs used by enlarged heads, the distorted research subjects imprisoned in the space. There are no student seats. There are no spaces designed for learning. The lecture building is a holding space, not an educational facility. Whatever lectures were held in it, the audience was not there by choice, and not there to be educated. Easter egg number 144. Alfred, the executioner hunter you meet early in the game, wears his hood at all times. Even in locations where other characters remove their headgear, or where the environment makes no visual sense for wearing one, Alfred keeps his hood up. This is usually read as character design. But the hood of the executioner's uniform was described earlier as obscuring the wearer's vision significantly. Alfred maintains this obstruction even in non-combat environments, even when speaking to you, even when he has no functional reason to restrict his own sight. He has worn it so long that removing it is no longer something he considers. Easter egg number 145. The Nightmare Frontier, an optional area accessed from the lecture building, contains a detail in its landscape that is almost never noticed because the area's hostile environment keeps players moving. If you stand at the central elevated point of the Nightmare Frontier and look in every direction, the horizon in each cardinal direction shows a different sky color. The Nightmare does not have a consistent sky. The space itself cannot maintain a coherent, atmospheric presentation. The Nightmare Frontier exists in a place where even light cannot agree on what it is. Easter egg number 146. There is a secret passage in central Yharnam that is opened by interacting with a specific environmental prop that most players never touch. The passage leads to a short corridor containing a corpse with a message item. The message, when read, is not in the standard format of other notes found in the game. It does not address a reader directly. It reads as though it was written by someone to themselves, as a reminder. The reminder is a name. Just a name, repeated 3 times. The name does not match any character in the game, any NPC, any boss, any lore figure. It is simply someone's name, written by themselves to themselves. To be sure, they would not forget it. Easter egg number 147. The Chalice dungeon entrance hidden beneath the Grand Cathedral is not the only subterranean access point in Yharnam. There are references in item descriptions and environmental details to at least 2 other access points that are not accessible in the final game. These cut or sealed access points suggest the Chalice dungeon system was originally intended to be accessible from multiple points throughout the city, which would mean the entire city of Yharnam was designed around a subterranean network, whose entrances were available at multiple points. The city was always a structure built around access to what was below it. Easter egg number 148. The bedridden patients you encounter in the game, those who are not yet transformed, but who are clearly in the later stages of exposure, always face the same direction when lying down. Regardless of the orientation of the bed they are in, and regardless of which room they are in, the patients always face the same compass direction. It is the direction that, on the overall map, points toward the deepest accessible point in the Chalice dungeons. The patients are not randomly positioned. Even unconscious, something has oriented them. Easter egg number 149. The gaslighting used in Yharnam streets has a specific flicker pattern that repeats on a cycle. Players who have timed the flicker cycle have found that it is approximately 19 seconds, and that across multiple street lamps in the same area the flicker is synchronized. The city's gaslighting system was not simply installed. Its flicker rhythm was calibrated to a consistent interval. Someone cared enough about the rhythm of light and shadow in Yharnam streets to set a specific timing. The city breathes on a cycle of 19. Easter egg number 150. The ending of the night, whichever ending the player chooses, all share a detail. Regardless of which ending you select, the hunter's dream, in the brief moments before it vanishes or transforms, shows a detail that players who have watched the ending cinematics frame by frame have noted. The doll visible at the edge of the frame during the dream's final moments is looking directly at the camera, not at the player character within the scene, at the camera, at you. She has always known you were there. Chapter 4. The Great Ones and the Cosmic Fringe. Easter egg number 151. The Great Ones, the cosmic entities that sit at the center of Bloodborne's mythology, are never fully described in any single source. The lore about them is deliberately fragmented and distributed across dozens of item descriptions, NPC comments, and environmental details. But when all references to the Great Ones are compiled and analyzed as a group, they share one characteristic that no in-game source explicitly states. Every Great One mentioned in the game, without exception, is described in relation to loss, specifically the loss of a child. The Great Ones are, in aggregate, a civilization of bereaved parents. Whatever else they are defined by what they are missing. Easter egg number 152. Oedon, the formless Great One who exists as pure sound and is never given a visual form, is the only entity in the game whose presence is measurable through a mechanic rather than a visual. Oedon's Writhe, the rune associated with this Great One, generates blood bullets when you're struck, converting damage into resources. Oedon's presence in the game is therefore always a transaction. Being hurt generates benefit. One possible reading is that Oedon does not have a body because Oedon is the principle itself, the mechanism by which suffering is converted into something usable. Not a being, but a process. Easter egg number 153. The Moon Presence, the final boss of the base game, appears only after you have consumed all 3 of the third of the umbilical cord items. Its arrival is triggered by the consumption of these items, not by any action you take against it. The Moon Presence does not come because you're strong enough to face it. It comes because you have eaten the right things. It is summoned by consumption, which places its appearance within a ritual framework rather than a combat framework. The final boss is not a battle to be won. It is an invitation to a ceremony. Easter egg number 154. Ebrietas, daughter of the cosmos, is a Great One, or Great One adjacent, being found deep in the Healing Church's upper facilities. She is described as having been left behind, abandoned by the other Great Ones. but the specific architecture of the room where you find her, the lining of the walls, the shape of the ceiling, the specific star patterns embedded in the flooring, suggest that the space was designed for her specifically. She was not put in a convenient storage space. She was given a room built to her specifications. The church did not find Ebrietas. The church was told where to build her room. Easter egg number 155. The celestial larvae, the small slug-like enemies found in the nightmare frontier and associated with cosmic transformations, move in a specific trajectory when not aggravated. They move in a straight line, in a single direction, and then stop. If you map the directions of their movement across the entire nightmare frontier, every larva is moving in a direction that, extended to its logical conclusion, points toward the same location in the game's geography. They are all slowly, independently, converging on the same spot. Whether the spot is a location in the game world or a concept the geometry is pointing toward, the convergence is measurable and not random. Easter egg number 156. The music associated with the moon presence in its boss fight is layered in a way that contains a melody buried beneath the main orchestral theme. This buried melody is played at a much lower frequency and tempo, and can only be heard clearly when the main theme is filtered out. The buried melody is recognizable to players who have spent time in the Hunter's Dream. It is the lullaby melody from Father Gascoigne's music box. The moon presence is playing the human lullaby beneath its own vast orchestral presence in the deepest layer of its music. It learned the song. It kept it. It plays it while it tries to consume you. Easter egg number 157. The Great One Murgo, whose lullaby you hear throughout the Nightmare of Mensis, is described as an infant. But infant Great Ones are not equivalent to infant humans. Item descriptions suggest Great Ones are born already possessing cosmic awareness. Murgo's crying, which powers the nightmare and drives hunters and scholars to madness, is not an infant cry of hunger or discomfort. It is a cry of awareness, a being born knowing everything, crying because it knows everything, filling its entire dimensional space with that sound. Easter egg number 158. The wet nurse, the boss who guards Murgo in the Nightmare of Mensis, has a design detail that is almost never commented on. Its wings, which unfold during its attack animations, have a texture on the inner surface that is different from the outer. The outer surface is feathered and dark. The inner surface, visible when wings spread, is smooth and pale, and under close examination, the texture used for this inner wing surface is the same texture used for the walls of the Hunter's Dream. The wet nurse's wings are lined with the same material as the space where you're safest. Something that tried to care for Murgo carries the fabric of refuge inside its most dangerous parts. Easter egg number 159. The School of Mensis, the organisation responsible for accessing the Nightmare of Mensis, is described as having made contact with a Great One by putting their brains in a specific device. The brain of Mensis that powers their ritual is not a human brain. Its size and form are not human. But the ritual documentation suggests the school believed they were using a human brain when they began. Somewhere in the process, what they were working with changed, and the school did not notice or did not stop. The distinction between what they started with and what they ended up with was not visible to them from inside the ritual. Easter egg number 160. Kos, the Great One whose corpse lies on the shore of the fishing hamlet, is the only Great One in the game who is dead at the time of the story. All other Great Ones encountered are alive in some form. Kos is dead, but Kos's corpse still produces offspring. The Kos parasite, an item obtained from her remains, still functions as a living object that grants arcane power. Death for a Great One is not what death is for a human or a beast, it is a change in state. The corpse of Kos continues to be Kos, producing Kos things, in the way that a star continues to produce light after it has died. Easter egg number 161. the specific location of Kos on the fishing hamlet shore, the position of her body relative to the water and the rocks, places her in a position that mirrors the position of a birthing figure. She did not wash up on shore. She came to shore deliberately, and she died in a position of arrival, not of collapse. Kos chose the fishing hamlet coast, for reasons the game suggests, but never states. That specific stretch of water was where she intended to be. Easter egg number 162. The Orphan of Kos, the being that emerges from Kos's corpse during its boss fight, carries a placenta as a weapon. This is visually grotesque and serves the purpose of communicating the creature's newborn status. But the specific shape of the placenta, when viewed from certain angles during the fight, resembles the shape of a specific Carol rune. The rune it resembles is the eye rune, associated with gaining insight through bloodshed. The orphan's weapon is simultaneously a biological object and a symbol. It was born holding meaning as well as matter. Easter egg number 163. The fishing village associated with the fishing hamlet was a community of people who were aware of Kos's presence long before the healing church arrived. The evidence for this is subtle. The architectural style of the hamlet's buildings, visible in the DLC area, includes decorative elements that depict the form of a great one, but rendered in a style that suggests long familiarity rather than recent revelation. These people had been living alongside Kos for a very long time. The hamlet was not a normal fishing village that discovered something terrible. It was a community built around the knowledge that Kos was there. Easter egg number 164. The Hunter's Nightmare, the space of the DLC, is explicitly stated to be a place where hunters who committed terrible deeds go after death to relive them. But the specific hunters you encounter in the nightmare are not random. Each one you find corresponds to a category of transgression referenced in the base game's item descriptions. Ludwig corresponds to the hubris of leading an army with a holy weapon. Simon corresponds to those who hunted past the point of reason. Lawrence corresponds to those who chose transformation over humanity. The nightmare is not a punishment. It is a taxonomy. Easter egg number 165. Lady Maria, the boss encountered in the research hall section of the Hunter's Nightmare, fights in a way that deliberately mirrors the player's own move, set more closely than almost any other boss in the game. She uses rallying, she uses transforming weapons, she uses aggressive forward pressure. She was designed to fight like a hunter, but as the fight progresses and her moveset expands to include fire and blood abilities, she fights less and less like a hunter and more like the cosmic adjacent creature the research hall was trying to produce. The fight is her transformation, playing out in real time in front of you. Easter egg number 166. The specific sword that Lady Maria uses, the Rakuyo, has a name that is Japanese in origin in a game where most weapons have Western European or Victorian-inspired naming conventions. The Rakuyo means something loosely translatable as falling leaves or the leaves that fall. A weapon named for transience, for the thing that leaves a tree and falls and does not return, wielded by a person who is trying very hard not to acknowledge what she has become. The weapon's name describes her situation more accurately than any dialogue she delivers. Easter egg number 167. The fishing hamlet villagers, the enemies you fight in that area, are in a more advanced stage of cosmic transformation than anything in the base game's surface areas. They have eyes growing from their bodies, they have deformed limbs. They are somewhere between human and something else, but their behaviour, unlike the beasts of Yharnam who are aggressive and animalistic, is subdued. They move slowly, they do not charge. The most transformed humans in the game are also the calmest. Whatever they are becoming, it is not making them more violent, it is making them quieter. Easter egg number 168. There is an item in the DLC called the Lawrence's Skull, found in a specific location in the hunter's nightmare. This skull was referenced earlier in the discussion of the reliquary skull in the Grand Cathedral, with the suggestion that the two skulls have different proportions. The Lawrence's skull found in the nightmare matches the skull proportions of the cleric beast, not a human. This is a significant piece of evidence for the argument that Lawrence the First Vicar's transformation into a beast was not a late-stage accident. It was planned, undertaken, and represented in the church's own reliquary with a substituted skull. The church knew what Lawrence had become and covered it over with a different bone. Easter egg number 169. The living failures, the boss encountered in the Astral Clock Tower area of the DLC, are explicitly described as failed experiments. But failed experiments are usually discarded. These ones are imprisoned in a celestial space, kept alive and contained. The choir did not discard them, it stored them. The specific containment of the living failures, in a space between the physical world and the cosmos, suggests the choir saw failure as a stage rather than an endpoint. The living failures were being kept for a later stage of the experiment. They are not refuse, they are work in progress. Easter egg number 170. The Astral Clock Tower itself, the architectural space where the DLC's final boss is found, has a design that does not match any other building in the game. It has a circular layout at every level, which is unusual in a game full of rectangular and angular spaces. The clock tower's circular geometry places the player always at the perimeter of a centre they cannot access. You fight through concentric rings around a point you can never stand at. The point at the centre of the clock tower is where the research hall's work was ultimately aimed, and the game never lets you reach it. Easter egg number 171. The doll, who exists in the hunter's dream and exists as a constructed being, does not age. This is established. But there is a subtle physical detail about her appearance that suggests age in a different sense. Her hands, examined closely in her dialogue animations, show a texture that is slightly more worn at the fingertips than at the palms. The wear pattern is consistent with someone who has handled objects repeatedly over a very long time. The doll has been touching things, picking things up, putting them down for so long that the fingertips of her constructed hands have worn slightly. She does not age, but she accumulates. Easter egg number 172. The note left by Master Philem, the phrase carved or marked near his position at Byrgenwerth, reads "Seek the old blood." This is one of the foundational lore statements of the game, but the specific verb seek has a narrower connotation in the original text. In the source language, the word used implies seeking something that belongs to you by right, something that you are owed, not merely something that you're curious about. Willem was not asking people to find old blood, he was telling them to reclaim it. The old blood belongs to someone, and the someone is us, and we have been separated from it, and we need to get it back. Easter egg number 173. The choir bell, a hunter tool associated with the uppermost tier of the healing church, produces a sound when used that is audibly different from all other sound effects in the game. It is a sound design choice that makes the bell distinct in the audio mix, but the specific harmonic of the choir bell matches the harmonic of the first bell heard during the Moon Presence's appearance. The choir bell and the arrival of the Moon Presence share a frequency. The church instrument and the cosmic entity are tuned to the same note. Either the church tuned their bell to match the presence, or the presence tuned itself to match the church. Easter egg number 174. The celestial architecture visible in the upper cathedral ward, the parts of the environment that appear to be reaching toward the sky or emerging from it, follow a specific design language that appears in one other location. The same architectural motifs appear in the Eyes Chalice dungeon, the deepest and most cosmically oriented of the main chalice types. The choir's space on the surface and the deepest cosmic burial ground share an architect. The connection between the surface and the depths is not merely thematic, it is structural. Easter egg number 175. Adela the nun, an NPC you can encounter in the game, will attack you under certain circumstances. If you've been repeatedly receiving blood from another NPC, Adela, whose religious framework involves blood as sacred, will eventually perceive this as a form of infidelity and attempt to kill you. The game presents this as a character quirk, but in the context of the Church's actual doctrine around blood, Adela is not having an irrational, jealous response. She is following Church law to the letter. The Church's blood doctrine creates, as a natural consequence, a possessive and violent relationship between blood givers and blood receivers. Adela is not unhinged. She is orthodox. Easter egg number 176. The specific dialogue that Yharnam uses when he first greets you in the Hunter's Dream is composed entirely of questions. He does not state anything in his opening address. Every sentence is interrogative. This is unusual for an introductory NPC whose function is to orient the player to the game's mechanics. He is not orienting you. He is evaluating your answers. The opening conversation in the Hunter's Dream is an assessment, and Yharnam is grading it. Easter egg number 177. There are small white flowers growing in the Hunter's Dream garden. These flowers do not appear anywhere in the physical world of Yharnam. They are only in the dream. But the specific flower form, a small clustered bloom on a thin stem, appears in one texture in the game world. It appears on the dress worn by Viola, Father Gascoigne's wife, in the brief moment her form is visible. The flowers of the Hunter's Dream are the flowers from Viola's dress. Either the dream was built around her memory, or her memory built itself into the dream after she died. Easter egg number 178. The Great One beast form of the cleric beast, the first boss, shares a skeletal structure with a very small detail found in the Grand Cathedral's interior. If you look at the ironwork on the cathedral's windows, one specific window frame contains an abstract iron form that approximates the silhouette of the cleric beast. The window was installed as part of the cathedral's original construction. The church knew what the cleric beast looked like before the cleric beast existed. Easter egg number 179. The DLC boss Simon the Harrowed is a hunter who gave up his gun to show that he was a non-violent seeker of knowledge. He appears in the hunter's nightmare, which means he committed acts during his life that were terrible enough to trap him there. But his self-imposed disarmament was not penance for those acts. He disarmed himself before the acts that sent him to the nightmare. He knew what he was going to do. He gave up the gun so that when he did those things, he could tell himself he had no choice. Easter egg number 180. The old hunter's badge, which unlocks specific weapons and items at the shop in the Hunter's Dream, is one of several badges in the game that serve this unlock function. Each badge depicts a different symbol associated with different hunter traditions, but the old hunter's badge is unique in that it depicts a symbol that does not match any hunter covenant or church affiliation in the game's lore. The symbol on the old hunter's badge appears in the Chalice dungeons as a marker for the deepest available ritual space. The oldest hunters were not affiliated with the church or the workshop. They were affiliated with the buried world beneath both. Easter egg number 181. The beast claw, a weapon associated with those who have embraced the beast transformation, has an item description that notes it increases in power the more feral the hunter becomes. The game mechanic for this is that equipping beast blood pellets and building the rally meter increases the weapon's output, but there is a specific threshold of beast meter accumulation at which the weapon's attack animation changes subtly, becoming slightly faster and more animalistic. The weapon is transforming its user in real time. As you use it more, it is teaching your body new movement patterns that it will not forget between swings. Easter egg number 182. The second phase of the Moon Presence fight begins with an attack that drains your health to a single point regardless of your maximum health pool. This is a well-known game mechanic, but the visual effect of this attack, the white light that sweeps across the arena, uses a color and intensity that appears in one other context in the game. The same white light appears very briefly in the opening cutscene during the blood transfusion. The Moon Presence's most powerful attack is the same process as the one that gave you access to the hunt in the first place. It is not attacking you, it is administering. Easter egg number 183. The item called Formless Udon, the rune associated with the Formless Great One, is described as containing the wisdom of Udon in liquid form. The word liquid appears in this description in a context that players usually connect to blood, but the original text uses a word that more precisely means without vessel rather than in liquid state. The wisdom of Udon exists without a container. It is not a liquid, it is free. The translation into English introduced a physical property that the original did not specify. Udon's wisdom has no form. Calling it a liquid was a choice that introduced a materiality the concept was deliberately designed to avoid. Easter egg number 184. There is a detail in the audio design of the game that has been documented by players who have analysed the music tracks in isolation. The standard health bar chime, the sound that plays when you consume a blood vial, is a specific musical pitch. That pitch is the same as the opening note of the Moon Presence's fight theme. Every time you heal during the game, you are harmonically connecting to the fight that ends it. Your survival sounds exactly like your destination. Easter egg number 185. The item description of Ariana's blood, if you receive it from that NPC and read it carefully, notes that her blood invigorates in a way that other healing blood does not. The specific verb used for this invigoration in the original text is one that appears elsewhere in the game only in descriptions of cosmic transformation. Ariana's blood does not simply restore health, it advances something. Every time you use her blood, you are progressing toward a transformation that she carries in her lineage. And at the end of the game, if you have used her blood enough times, her lineage produces a result that demonstrates exactly where that progression leads. Easter egg number 186. There are 7 Carol runes in the game that are considered the fundamental tier of the rune system. 7, in the game's various numerical patterns, appears consistently in association with the number of limbs on a standard amygdala model. The 7 fundamental runes and the 7 visible limbs of the amygdala are connected by the game's embedded numerology in a way that places rune inscription and Great One anatomy in the same mathematical language. The runes are not notations of cosmic wisdom. They are pieces of a body distributed into symbol form. Easter egg number 187. The Chalice dungeon system as a whole, which contains procedurally generated spaces that vary between playthroughs, has a fixed element at its deepest accessible layer. Regardless of the procedural variation in the rooms leading to it, the final chamber of the deepest chalice always generates with the same specific environmental feature, a pool of liquid in the center of the room. This pool is always present, always the same size, always the same position. The procedural generation of the entire dungeon system converges on this one fixed, wet, empty point at the bottom. Whatever is at the bottom of the Chalice dungeons is always wet. It is always the same size and shape, and it is always empty when you arrive. Easter egg number 188. Ludwig the Holy Blade, the first boss of the DLC, transitions in his second phase to using the Holy Moonlight sword after regaining a moment of clarity. This is presented as a redemption moment. His humanity briefly returns, but the weapon he picks up, the Holy Moonlight sword, is described as a weapon dreamed into being by an illustrious hunter, not physically forged. It is a dream weapon. Ludwig's moment of clarity, his return to humanity, is triggered by picking up an object that does not physically exist. His redemption is built on something that is as unreal as the nightmare around him. The game presents this as beautiful. It may also be deliberate cruelty. Easter egg number 189. The Yharnam sunrise ending, in which you choose to submit to Yharnam and die so that the dream can be released, is typically read as the most merciful ending, but the post-credits moment shows the doll picking up your bloodied remains in the hunter's dream. She handles what is left of you with care, but the position she places you in, visible for just a moment before the scene ends, mirrors the position of the gravestone markers in the dream's garden. She is preparing a memorial. She has done this before. The number of times she has done exactly this, in exactly this way, is implied by the number of things growing quietly in the dream around her. Easter egg number 190. Gehrman's scythe, the burial blade, is the weapon associated with death throughout the game's symbolism. Its item description notes that it was the first hunter weapon, predating all others. But the design of the blade itself, the specific curved form and handle length, matches the form used in pre-church Thumerian burial rituals as depicted in Chalice dungeon murals. The first hunter weapon was not invented by the workshop tradition. It was borrowed from the burial practice of a civilization that had already worked out how to manage the relationship between the living and whatever came after. Yharnam held the oldest weapon in the world. He used it to tend a dream. Chapter 5. The Chalice Dungeons and the Buried World Easter egg number 191. The Chalice Dungeons are described in the game as ritual burial grounds for a civilization predating Yharnam by millennia. But the specific rituals the dungeons were used for are never fully enumerated in any single source. What you can piece together from item descriptions and dungeon architecture is that the rituals were not for honouring the dead. They were for managing the dead, specifically for managing what the dead might still be capable of, and for ensuring that what the dead knew was either preserved or destroyed, depending on the specific chamber and the specific ceremony. Easter egg number 192. The Pthumerian civilization, whose remains fill the Chalice dungeons, left behind a specific recurring symbol in their architectural decoration. This symbol, a circle with a vertical line through its centre, appears on walls, floors, ritual altars, and coffin surfaces throughout the dungeon network. In standard symbolic language, this might represent a variety of things. But in Bloodborne's visual vocabulary, this specific form appears in one other location. It is the shape of the pupil of the Great One Eyes, depicted in the upper cathedral, ward-stained glass. The Pthumerians were decorating their burial infrastructure with the eyes of Great Ones. Every wall in the Chalice dungeons is being watched. Easter egg number 193. The Pthumerian descendant enemy type, which appears in Chalice dungeons as a boss, moves with a speed and grace that no other humanoid enemy in the game matches. Their movement is closer to the movement of the player character than to any NPC enemy, suggesting a physical capability that is significantly above what the game presents as the normal range for humans. The Pthumerians who maintained the deepest dungeons were not ordinary people. Whatever the old blood did to the first hunters and scholars who encountered it, the Pthumerians had already undergone that process and come out the other side and kept going. Easter egg number 194. The coffins found throughout the Chalice dungeons are oriented in a specific direction within each chamber. In the shallower dungeons, the coffins face toward each other across the room's central axis. In the deeper dungeons, the coffins all face the same direction, toward the chamber's deepest wall. In the deepest accessible Chalice layers, the coffins have no consistent orientation. They face in random directions, as though something disrupted the careful arrangement that had been maintained in all the layers above. Whatever happened in the deepest layer, it was disorienting enough to overturn furniture. Easter egg number 195. The blood pools in chalice dungeon chambers are fresh. They are not ancient dried stains consistent with a burial ground that has been sealed for thousands of years. They are wet. The blood in the chalice dungeons is being replenished by something, or is being produced continuously by the things that still live in them. The dungeons are not archaeological sites. They are functioning biological systems that have been running continuously since the Pthumerian civilization used them. Easter egg number 196. Amygdala, the Great One that appears as a dungeon boss and as an environmental presence throughout the high insight version of the game's surface areas, has a boss room in the Chalice dungeons that is architecturally distinct from all other Chalice boss rooms. Most Chalice boss rooms are circular or rectangular. The Amygdala's dungeon room is irregular, with alcoves and projections along its walls that have no apparent function. If you look at these alcoves and projections and compare their arrangement to the position of the amygdala's arms during its attack animations, the architecture of the room was designed to accommodate the creature during specific postures. The room was built to hold the amygdala in a particular position for a purpose that is not evident from the fight. Easter egg number 197. The loot found in Chalice Dungeon coffins follows a pattern that has nothing to do with procedural generation. Procedural generation determines the dungeon layout, but the type of item found in a coffin is determined by the dungeon layer and the coffin's position within the chamber. Coffins near entrances contain common materials. Coffins near ritual altars contain rarer items. Coffins that are sealed and require the player to open them contain things that universally belong to the category of items associated with insight and cosmic knowledge. The Pthumerians buried their most sensitive intellectual materials with the dead. Knowledge was interred rather than transmitted. Easter egg number 198. The merciless Watcher enemies found in the Chalice dungeons are not Pthumerian by their physical characteristics. They are physically similar to the League of Hunters enemies found on the surface, but they are in the dungeons, in spaces that are sealed and ancient. If they entered through the same routes that the player uses, they would have had to pass through dozens of secured chambers to reach the positions where they appear. They did not enter through the top. They have been in the dungeons for an indeterminate period of time and may have descended from individuals who entered the dungeon system before it was understood as dangerous. Easter egg number 199. The Watchdog of the Old Lords, a boss in the Chalice dungeons, is a creature that has been burning continuously for an indeterminate period. Its entire body is covered in fire that does not consume it. The item description associated with this creature notes that it was set alight as part of its original installation in the dungeon. Someone or some institution lit this creature on fire and locked it in a room, and the creature has been burning in that room ever since. The Chalice dungeons contain a creature that has been alive and burning in a sealed room since the Pthumerian civilization was active. The question the game leaves you to sit with is not how this is possible. It is why the Pthumerians did it. Easter egg number 200. The deepest layer of the Pthumeru Ihil Chalice, the most extreme accessible dungeon, contains a boss room that is the largest enclosed space in the game. Not just in the Chalice dungeons, in the entire game. The room is bigger than any cathedral, bigger than any nightmare space. It was constructed to house something very large. The boss you encounter there, the Pthumeru Ihil Root Chalice's final boss, does not fill the space. Whatever was in this room before was larger. The room was built for something that is no longer there, and the game does not tell you where it went. Easter egg number 201. The ritual chalices themselves, the items you use to create chalice dungeons, are each described as having been carved from a specific material. Different chalices use different materials, but every material listed across all chalice descriptions appears in one other context in the game. Each material is also mentioned in the description of a boss found in the Chalice network, always in association with the same dungeon type as the Chalice. The chalices are carved from the bodies of the bosses they contain. You are using the remains of what you will fight as the key to the room where you will fight it. Easter egg number 202. The bell that summons cooperators in Chalice dungeons is the same bell that summons invaders in the surface world. The same item, the small resonant bell, serves both functions. In the surface world, ringing the bell calls allies. In the Chalice dungeons, the same bell's function is identical, but the people who come are coming from further away, through more layers of reality. The Chalice dungeons are a place where the mechanics of connection and cooperation remain the same, but the distance they have to cover is vastly greater. Something about the dungeons compresses the spaces between people in a way the surface world does not. Easter egg number 203. The Yharnam Thumerian Queen, the final boss of the main Chalice dungeon line, is pregnant. This is stated in her item description and is visible in her character model. She is presented as a powerful and ancient figure who is simultaneously in a state of physical vulnerability. The Pthumerian civilization's most powerful remaining individual is expecting a child at the bottom of their most sacred burial ground. What she is carrying and what it will become are questions the game places at the end of the deepest accessible dungeon and then does not answer. Easter egg number 204. The Great Pthumeru Ahil Chalice, if you read its description against the description of the blood rock found near the Yharnam Queen, reveals a narrative connection that most players never notice. Both descriptions reference a specific event described as the descent. The descent is not defined in either description, but the context implies it was a pivotal event, a moment when something came down from above into the dungeon space, and the Pthumerian civilization's documentation of this event was important enough to inscribe on both their most sacred ritual vessel and their most rare upgrading material. Easter egg number 205. There is a chamber in the Chalice dungeons that contains no enemies, no loot, no boss door, and no puzzle element. It is a room with nothing in it. Players who have mapped the Chalice network have documented this room appearing occasionally in the procedural generation, a space that the dungeon allocates but puts nothing inside. The game's other empty rooms always have some environmental prop or feature. This specific room type is completely bare. It was designed deliberately to be a room containing nothing. What a Pthumerian burial complex intended to do with a sealed empty room is a question that the game offers no answer to. Easter egg number 206. The flame weapon known as the boom hammer, found in the Old Hunters DLC, has an item description that places its invention within a specific church research program. That program is described in the item description as having been aimed at developing a weapon capable of harming things that could not be hurt by conventional means. The boom hammer produces explosive fire on contact. The only enemies in the game that are specifically resistant to conventional physical damage are the Great One adjacent kin enemies. The boom hammer was designed to hurt Great Ones. Someone in the church at some point decided they needed a weapon that could do that, and made one and left it in the hunter's nightmare, where no one would look for it. Easter egg number 207. The Chalice dungeon altar structures all share a design element with the altar in the Grand Cathedral. Specifically, the front face of each altar has a specific carved relief that is the same across all altars in all dungeon types. This relief is not visible in the Grand Cathedral altar's front face during normal gameplay, but the back face of the cathedral altar, which you can access by moving the camera into a specific angle behind it, shows the same relief. The cathedral altar and every Chalice altar share the same image on the surface that is designed to face away from the worshipper. What they were showing was not for the congregation, it was for whatever was on the other side. Easter egg number 208. The sage's hair and sage's wrist items found in the Chalice dungeons, are described as belonging to a sage of the old Pthumerian civilization. But the number of these items that can be collected across all Chalice variants suggests they came from more than one person. Either the Pthumerian sage was capable of regenerating removed limbs, or there were multiple sages, or the sage's remains are reproduced in each Chalice instance as part of the dungeon generation. The last option is the most disturbing, as it implies the dungeon system is not a static relic, but a living mechanism that produces sage material as part of its ongoing operation. Easter egg number 209. The descent through the Chalice dungeons, from the shallowest to the deepest level, tracks with an increase in environmental temperature. The deeper layers are warmer than the shallower ones. The heat increases gradually enough that players rarely consciously register it. By the deepest accessible layer, the visual design of the space, the colour palette, and the light sources has shifted to much warmer tones. The bottom of the Chalice dungeons is warm. Something generates heat down there. Whatever it is, it has been generating that heat for a very long time. Easter egg number 210. The Iosefka at the clinic, the replacement who takes over from the real Iosefka, will give you items if you send NPCs to her clinic during the game. The items she provides are celestial mobs, the cosmic transformed beings from the upper cathedral ward. She is not curing the NPCs you send to her. She is transforming them into celestial mobs and then handing you the results. But the specific celestial mob she gives you has a slightly higher health pool than the celestial mobs you encounter as enemies. She is producing a superior version. Whatever her procedure is, it is more refined than what the church achieved in the upper cathedral ward. She has improved the process. Easter egg number 211. The door at the back of Byrgenwerth, the one that requires a specific key to open, leads to Moonside Lake. The lake is the body of water where the moon presence's influence is strongest in the physical world. But the door is locked from the inside. The key you use to open it was not made to open it from your side. The key's design, visible in its inventory art, has its notches oriented for insertion from the lake side of the door. The door to Moonside Lake was meant to be opened from out there. Someone came from the lake to lock it, and then left the key inside with the Byrgenwerth scholars. Easter egg number 212. The Great Lake Rune, one of the fundamental defense runes you can inscribe on your character, is shaped like a circle. In the game's rune language, this circle is associated with the cosmic void, with the space between things rather than the things themselves. Equipping this rune inscribes a symbol of emptiness on your character to reduce damage. You are made harder to harm by accepting the void. You survive better because you have written nothing on yourself. The defensive capacity of the Great Lake Rune is not protection, it is absence, used strategically. Easter egg number 213. The Communion Rune, which increases the number of blood vials you can carry, is shaped like a triangle. The specific orientation of this triangle, point downward, matches the orientation used in pre-church Pthumerian ritual drawings to represent receiving. The Communion Rune, which allows you to carry more healing blood, is a symbol of receptivity drawn directly from the oldest ritual tradition the game depicts. You are not using a church rune when you equip Communion. You're using a Pthumerian one, and the church may not have known the difference. Easter egg number 214. The boss known as Watchdog of the Old Lords appears in two forms across different Chalice dungeon variants. In its standard form, it is a large beast made of compressed flesh and fire. In its variant form, encountered in later dungeon types, it has a second head that grows from its back, facing backward. The second head does not contribute to the boss's attacks. It simply faces the direction from which you entered the room. It watched you come in. It has been watching the entrance the whole time you have been fighting the head that faces you. Easter egg number 215. The Mensis cage, the metal helmet worn by the scholars of the School of Mensis, is described as allowing the wearer to make contact with the Great Ones. by transforming the mind within it into something more hospitable to cosmic contact. The item description notes this approach is not endorsed by the Healing Church, but the Mensis cage and the choir instruments share the same basic material and the same basic logic of resonance-based contact. The Church and Mensis were doing the same thing with different equipment and calling it different names so that neither institution would have to credit the other. Easter egg number 216. In the lowest and most hostile areas of the Chalice dungeons, specifically in the Eye Hill dungeons, the enemy placement includes a specific configuration that players have identified as repeating across different room types. In each of these configurations, one enemy is positioned facing a corner, while the others face outward toward the player. The enemy in the corner does not attack unless directly approached. It is facing the wall of the oldest burial ground in the game. Whatever is in the Thumerian architecture of the walls, this specific enemy has found it and is attending to it. Easter egg number 217. The tomb mold items found throughout the Chalice dungeons as consumables grow on every surface in the dungeon network. The specific type of mold, described in the item text as a variant of the standard tomb mold that grows in the deepest layers, produces a much larger insight gain when consumed. The insight gain from deep dungeon mold is out of proportion to anything else in the game at comparable depth. The deepest burial chambers in Yharnam have a local environment that is saturated with knowledge, ambient knowledge that is being absorbed passively by the biological processes of mold growth and then delivered to anyone who eats the mold. The Chalice dungeons are literally growing wisdom on their walls. Easter egg number 218. The torches used to light the Chalice dungeons are a different design from the torches used in Yharnam surface areas. The dungeon torches are older in their design language, matching the Pithumerian style visible in the decorative elements of the dungeon architecture. The dungeons were illuminated by the Pithumerians and have remained illuminated since. Someone has been maintaining the torches in the buried ritual grounds. The fuel source for torches that have been burning for thousands of years in a sealed burial complex is not a detail the game addresses directly. Easter egg number 219. The Thumerian court ladies, the dressed female enemies found in certain upper Chalice dungeon layers, wear garments that are preserved perfectly despite the age the dungeons are supposed to represent. Fabrics do not survive thousands of years in underground conditions. The court ladies' clothing is not preserved, it is new. Either the Pithumerian court ladies are not as old as the dungeons suggest, or the dungeons are periodically repopulated with fresh inhabitants who maintain the aesthetic of the original civilization. The Chalice dungeons may not be a relic, they may be a living practice, continuously performing an ancient ceremony. Easter egg number 220. There is a specific item combination in the Chalice dungeons that, when two particular items are equipped simultaneously, produces an unintended visual effect in the dungeon's lighting system. The torches flicker in a synchronized pattern for several seconds before returning to normal. This has been documented by multiple players and is generally interpreted as an Easter egg from the game's developers. But the synchronized flicker follows the same rhythm as the synchronized flicker of the gas lamps in Central Yharnam documented earlier, the 19-second cycle. The developers, in hiding a visual Easter egg in the Chalice dungeons, chose to synchronize it with the rhythmic pattern embedded in the surface city's lighting. The buried world and the surface world breathe together. Chapter 6. Item Descriptions and Hidden Lore. Easter egg number 221. The item description for the Blood Rapture rune, which converts visceral attacks into blood restoration, uses an unusual word in its original Japanese text. The word chosen for visceral attack in this description is not the mechanical term used in the game's tutorial text. It is a word that more literally translates as the moment of knowing, a reference to the instant of insight rather than the physical act of striking a staggered enemy. In the game's arcane language, Killing enemies efficiently is an epistemological act. You learn through the killing. The healing is secondary. Easter egg number 222. The Hunter Chief emblem, a key item used to open a shortcut gate in central Yharnam, has an item description that is 3 sentences long. The first and third sentences are factual. The middle sentence, unusually for a key item, is philosophical. It reads that hunters pursue beasts because the beast within demands it. This line does not appear in any other key item description. Key items describe their function. This one describes a condition. The middle sentence is not explaining what the key does. It is explaining why the hunter carrying it will eventually become something the key can no longer hold. Easter egg number 223. The Old Hunter Bone, an item that enhances your dodge speed by invoking the spirit of an old hunter's fighting style, has an item description that references a specific individual rather than a type. The individual is not named, but is described by specific physical characteristics. Those characteristics match the model of Ludwig the Holy Blade's pre-beast form, visible in the portrait in the research hall. The Old Hunter Bone belonged to Ludwig. You dodge faster by invoking the reflexes of the man who lost himself to the beast and is trapped in the nightmare. His speed survives him in item form. Easter egg number 224. The twin bloodstones upgrading materials used to enhance hunter weapons are described as crystallized blood from a specific source, but crystallized blood in real biological terms is not possible in the way the game describes it. Blood does not crystallize, it coagulates and dries. What is described as crystallized blood in the item is either blood that has undergone a supernatural process of mineralization or a substance that shares visual and textural qualities with blood but is something else entirely. The game calls it blood, the chemistry of it is not blood chemistry. Easter egg number 225. The Dissipating Lake rune, a defense-oriented rune, is one of the most visually distinctive runes in the game. Its shape, a horizontal oval with a vertical distortion through the center, does not match any other rune design. Other runes are based on the same set of geometric primitives, circles, lines, triangles. The Dissipating Lake rune is the only rune that uses an oval base form. This shape appears in one other context in the game. It is the shape of the Eye of the Moon Presence, as visible in its model during the boss fight. The defense rune associated with water and dispersal is shaped like the eye of the final boss. Easter egg number 226. The Carol rune, air, associated with gaining echoes from visceral attacks, has an item description that speculates on the meaning of air in the context of the game's lore. The description suggests that the heir to the dream refers to someone who will eventually inherit the hunter's dream itself, becoming its next keeper. The description of this rune, a minor combat enhancement, contains the plot of the Yharnam sunrise ending. The rune was telling you from early in the game what one of the endings would ask of you. The function of the air rune and the function of the ending that makes Gehrman free are the same gesture, just at different scales. Easter egg number 227. The item description for the eye rune, which increases item discovery through bloodshed, uses the phrase "eyes of the blood-starved" to describe the mechanism. But the blood-starved beast is a boss you encounter relatively early in the game, and its eye design, visible in its character model, is described in its bestiary as having eyes that cannot close, eyes that cannot stop looking. The eye rune works by making you like the blood-starved beast, by making you unable to stop seeing. The enhancement to item discovery is not a mechanical abstraction. It is a description of a perceptual state that the game presents as something between a gift and an affliction. Easter egg number 228. Insight as a stat in Bloodborne does things that extend beyond its stated mechanical functions of expanding the game world and enabling certain interactions. One of its hidden effects is that it makes enemies stronger. This is stated in the game's documentation. But what is not explicitly stated is that the enemies it makes strongest Those who gain the most from your accumulated insight are not the beast enemies. They are the kin enemies, the Great One adjacent beings. Insight does not make the world more dangerous equally. It specifically enhances the danger of the things that exist closest to the cosmic level. The more you understand, the more those things can reach you. Easter egg number 229. The clawmark rune, which enhances visceral attacks and is associated with beast transformation, is described as the result of a beast carving the rune onto itself. A beast created a rune. The rune-making process, established elsewhere as a carol function that requires intelligence and the ability to transcribe Great One languages, was performed by a beast. Either the beast in question had not entirely lost its higher functions despite its transformation, or the distinction between beast intelligence and human intelligence in this game's world is much smaller than the horror of the transformation suggests. Easter egg number 230. The nourishing blood gems, which increase all damage dealt, have an item description that uses a specific agricultural metaphor. The blood gem nourishes the weapon, the description states, as roots nourish a tree. But in the game's ecosystem, roots are associated with transformation and invasion, specifically with the roots visible in the forbidden woods that have overtaken structures and bodies. The growth metaphor in the nourishing blood gem description is not a gentle gardening image. It is a description of aggressive biological colonization, presented warmly, as though the colonization of your weapon by an alien crystalline substance is a form of care. Easter egg number 231. The descriptions of the Ailing Loran Chalice and the Lower Ailing Loran Chalice, the two dungeon types associated with the destroyed civilization of Loran, together tell a story that neither tells alone. Reading them in sequence reveals a specific progression, a civilization's first encounter with a Great One, followed by its decision to pursue that contact rather than retreat from it, followed by the outcome. The Loran Chalice descriptions are a complete tragedy in two item descriptions. The first item says what Loran was, the second item says what remained. Easter egg number 232. The messenger items, the small creatures in the hunter's dream that hand you weapons and provide services, have an item description for the messengers themselves that is found in a specific note item. The note describes messengers as beings who existed in the dream before the hunter arrived, who come and go between the dream and the waking world. But the note also includes a line that is easily skipped, a parenthetical observation that the messengers appear to remember the hunters who are no longer there. They are not new. They knew people before you. Whatever they know about those previous people, they have not shared it with you, and they will not share what they know about you with whoever comes next. Easter egg number 233. The Carol Rune Milkweed, the most visually complex of the runes, transforms the player character into a plant-like humanoid form when equipped with the appropriate weapon set. Its description states it is the rune of a certain lumen wood, suggesting the rune was derived from or created by a specific individual. The name lumenwood appears nowhere else in the game's explicit lore, but the combination of the Latin root lumen, meaning light, and wood, meaning forest or material, suggests a being that was simultaneously a light source and a tree-like form. Whatever lumenwood was, it left its shape in a rune. You can wear the shape of whatever it was. Easter egg number 234. The sinister resonant bell, used to invade other players' games as an enemy, has an item description that distinguishes it from the regular bell by the word sinister, which in context means left-handed in its original Latin derivation. The left-handed bell is the invasion bell. The right-handed bell is the cooperation bell. This handed distinction places Bloodborne's multiplayer system within a symbolic framework where the left and right hands of a gesture have opposite moral valences. You invade with your left hand and cooperate with your right. The game encodes a moral cosmology into which hand you prefer. Easter egg number 235. The delayed Molotov, a throwable item that detonates after a brief delay, has an item description that is atypically personal in tone. Most throwable items have functional descriptions. The delayed Molotov description reads as though it was written by someone who had a strong opinion about patience. The word deliberate appears in the description twice, once in relation to the fuse and once in relation to the hunter using it. The item text is giving behavioral instruction. Whoever wrote the item description of the delayed Molotov was not describing a weapon. They were advising a person. Easter egg number 236. The Bloodstone Chunk, a high-tier weapon upgrading material, has an item description that suggests it formed naturally inside a living body. It describes the stone as having condensed from blood that had been compressed over a very long time. The image is of a blood clot that, given enough time and pressure, becomes mineral. It suggests that the upgrade materials for hunter weapons come from the bodies of creatures or people who spent very long periods with blood under extraordinary conditions. Where this blood was kept under those conditions is not stated, but the most plausible location is the one with the most ancient blood in the game. Easter egg number 237. The Guidance Rune, which increases visceral attack damage based on the game's highest difficulty achievement of fighting with full insight, has a description that describes the guidance not as combat instruction, but as a kind of faith. The rune text states that those who have truly sought and found see the path clearly when they strike. The Guidance Rune frames high insight combat as a spiritual state rather than a skill state. The most effective way to deal damage in the game is not to be skilled, it is to be enlightened. The game's damage formula rewards understanding over reflexes and calls that reward guidance. Easter egg number 238. The vermin item, dropped by enemies in the League of Hunters Covenant and subsequently crushed under the player's foot as part of Covenant progression, is described in its item description as something that inhabits every human body. The vermin does not appear in the human body to a normal observer. It appears only when you have advanced sufficiently in the League's perspective and applied the appropriate tool. The League of Hunters believe that every human being has vermin inside them, that the vermin is the source of the beast impulse, and that their mission is to crush it. They are right that the vermin is there. Whether their interpretation of what it means is correct is one of the game's quieter and more disturbing open questions.